I drove the old RV into the vast lands of Yellowstone as dusk swallowed the last light of day. The sky glowed pale orange, the ridges of pine trees darkening like rows of black pillars etched against the horizon. I turned off the engine and sat still. No sound, except the wind twisting through the cracks of the door. No Abigail. The smell of stale coffee still lingered in the thermos beside the driver's seat. That scent reminded me of the mornings we once spent together, watching steam rise from the lake in the cold. I placed my hand on her old book, its cover wrinkled, pages yellowed. The book I had carried through the journey, as if keeping a fragment of her breath alive. Outside, the sun had sunk completely. The sky shattered into an endless darkness, spilling down across the grasslands in steaming hot springs. I parked near an open clearing by the path to an abandoned mine. I wanted to hide. Hide from familiar eyes, hide from meaningless condolences. Here in Yellowstone, I thought I could be cloaked in silence. But silence doesn't erase memory. It only makes the voice calling from the shadows ring louder. The next day, I followed the old path toward the forsaken mine. Wild grass covered it, mixing with the scent of damp earth and rusted iron. A mine cart lay on its side in a ditch, its metal turned reddish-brown, wheels ready to fall off. Wind whistled through the holes in its frame, producing a faint, eerie howl. A wooden shack nearby was rotted through. The door creaked under the push of the wind, walls peeled in patches, the roof half collapsed. I stepped inside, a thick mustiness coating the air, like breathing another layer of time. Faint footprints lingered on the floor, blurred beneath the dust. I told myself they were from old tourists passing through. But my heart raced, pounding into memory. I thought I heard Abigail softly call my name. The mine's entrance was now just a blackened mouth, half collapsed under rubble. I leaned in, a chill washing over my face. The air was thick, damp, clinging to my skin. I shone my flashlight, but the beam flickered, the battery nearly dead. When I returned to the RV, I noticed drag marks across the ground, just outside the door, deep ruts as if something heavy had been hauled away. My chest sank. I remembered the morning Abigail passed, her hands slipping from mine, light as a leaf, and now these marks, the opposite, so heavy they seemed to drag piece itself from the earth. Night fell fast. I switched on the cabin light, but it flickered and died. Even the backup battery wouldn't glow. Outside, the wind carried the stench of sulfur from the hot springs. Acrid. Choking. I wrinkled my nose, uneasy. When I looked through the window, my heart seized. On the glass, a faint handprint. Long, thin, like claws traced across it. I touched it. Dust clung to my finger. I pulled back, trembling. Impossible. I had locked the door, a creak, then silence. Even the wind stopped, as though the whole forest held its breath. In the dark, I saw Abigail's eyes in memory. The last time she looked at me without reproach, only surrender. I wanted to weep. But all I heard was my heartbeat, mixed with a faint hiss outside the RV. That night I couldn't sleep. Cold crept through every seam, clinging to my skin like wet hands. I sat in the chair, the hunting rifle across my lap. In the pitch-dark RV, the only light came from the weak flashlight, stuttering on the verge of death. The wind scraped against the walls, mingled with moans rising from deep in the forest. I couldn't tell if it was wind or something else. Then it came. A knock. Dry. Sharp. At the door. I held my breath. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would rip my chest apart. I raised the gun. The knock repeated. Harder. Then faster. The RV quivered, metal rattling. I shot up, my legs trembling. "Abigail," I whispered. The sound left my lips and I knew I was a fool. No reply. Only a shadow moved around the window. Step by step, I edged closer. Cold sweat trickled down my back. I peered through the small glass pane. Something stood there. Faceless, shapeless. A blur like smoke, a shadow slipping under the moonlight. But I felt it looking. Heavy, piercing, through the glass. Straight into me. I stumbled back, the shape tilted, clinging to the window. The pane rattled once. I screamed, cocked the gun, and flung the door open. Cold slammed my face. I fired. The blast tore the night apart, echoing through the woods like a roar. But the figure didn't vanish. It unraveled into wisps of mist, coiling like fog, then gathered again in front of me. No blood, no cry, only silence. I staggered inside. The rifle shook in my hands. I fired again and again. Flashes lit the dark, and in each flare I saw the truth. The shadow didn't leave. It wrapped around the RV, crawling like smoke. The door shook violently. Glass cracked. A hand pressed against it, long, thin, fingers bent like claws. It dragged across the pane, screeching, making my spine crawl. I screamed hoarsely. I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it. The trembling beam cut through emptiness. The shadow recoiled yet lingered, shifting like the earth's breath. My skin prickled, hair standing stiff. I thought of Abigail. The morning I held her hand for the last time, cold, fragile. Now that same cold engulfed me. Maybe I hadn't come here to hide. Maybe I'd come to corner myself. One final knock, then silence. I collapsed against the door, rifle slipping from my grasp. My whole body shivered. I couldn't tell if I still heard my heart or footsteps outside. Everything blended. Only darkness remained, heavy as stone. I must have dozed without knowing. When I opened my eyes, morning light seeped through thin mist into the cracks of the door. My head throbbed as if I hadn't slept at all. Outside, the forest lay silent. No more knocks. No shadow. I turned the key. The RV roared, rough but alive. I froze. Last night it had died, battery drained to nothing. Now it purred like nothing had ever gone wrong. I didn't wait. I pressed the gas. The RV shuddered, pulling away from the abandoned mine. The road wavered ahead. Pale sunlight spilled over the hills, pine trees glittering with dew. I glanced into the rearview mirror, my heart clenched. On the back window, a new handprint. Clear, long, thin, fingers sharp like talons. The morning dust couldn't hide it. It gleamed wet, as if just pressed there. I spun around, but only emptiness stared back. I forced my eyes forward. My hands gripped the wheel, palms drenched in sweat. From the wind, a faint sound rose, like stones tumbling down a canyon far away. I pressed harder on the gas. Yet in the mirror, the ground behind the RV bore drag marks, carved deep into the grass. I don't know if I escaped, or if I only carried it with me. And in that fleeting glow of morning light against the glass, I thought of Abigail. If she were alive, she might lay a hand on my shoulder and tell me to go home. But my shoulder was bare, and somewhere out there, another hand was still searching for a place to rest. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, enjoying the silence for hours. But now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life, birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique one I'd brought along to mess around with during my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing, until now. I stood up from the fire, walking over to the RV and ducking inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dial, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers. 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 137. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere, maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing, I was sure, but the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, like it was for me. I shut the radio off, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods, the towering pines looming overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, made me uneasy. I stepped back outside, trying to push the growing sense of unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. I heard it too. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals, glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes were constantly scanning the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "A warning from what?" Before I could ask more, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I could barely whisper back, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "We see you." the voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy, like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles, the battery draining faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 137. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device pulsing with an eerie, cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, all crashed into me at once in an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. The lights followed me, the clicking never far behind, but I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper. Even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, it didn't stop. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 137. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed, complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them, carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped. The trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere. Slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, Sola, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondack, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right, and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the Ader, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. I should have known better than to follow a map that nobody could quite explain. It was a folded, water-stained paper that an older man at a gas station in Virginia pressed into my hands when I told him I was heading toward the Blue Ridge. His voice cracked with something halfway between warning and amusement. "You camping out there in your RV? Then you best stay on the roads you know. Not all places welcome wheels. Not all places stay where they're supposed to." I thought he was talking about bad directions or outdated trails. But when I opened that map later that night, parked at a rest stop under the hum of orange sodium lights, I realized the roads it showed didn't quite match anything on Google Maps. They looped and curved, but not in ways that followed the contour of the mountains. It was almost like they were sketched in circles, tight spirals that wound in on themselves. Someone had scribbled 3 words at the edge: Appalachian vortexes. At first, I laughed it off. Locals love to scare travelers, especially those of us who live out of our rigs, with stories about haints, phantom lights, or old mining tunnels that echo with voices. But I wasn't new to this life. I had been full-timing in my RV for 2 years, moving along forgotten campgrounds, chasing quiet, chasing space. Fear, I told myself, belonged to the unprepared. That confidence carried me down Highway 58 the next morning, where mist clung to the treetops like gauze, and every switchback rattled the dishes in my cabinets. The further I drove, the more the mountains seemed to press inward. The forest leaned close, dark with hemlock and rhododendron, their branches dripping from last night's rain. It felt as if I were being swallowed, the highway narrowing into a throat. I pulled into a campground I'd marked ahead of time. It wasn't official, just a pull-off by a river, wide enough for 1 or 2 RVs. Nobody else was there. The air smelled of moss and stone, and the water moved slow, its surface broken now and then by unseen fish. I liked it immediately. Solitude was my currency, and this place looked like it had plenty to offer. Still, I kept thinking about the man at the gas station. His cracked hands, his fixed eyes, the way he pressed that map into my palm as if he had to get rid of it before it burned him. I left it folded on the passenger seat, but I could feel its weight even as I leveled my RV and hooked into nothing but silence. That night, the quiet wasn't what I expected. Usually, you hear owls, coyotes, the shuffle of raccoons. Here, it was a heavy absence, the kind that made your own heartbeat feel too loud. When the wind moved, it sounded less like a breeze through branches and more like whispers against glass. I told myself it was fatigue. I cooked a simple dinner, listened to the ticking of my stovetop cooling, and stretched out on the bed with a book. Sometime after midnight, I woke to knocking. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't even forceful. Just knock, knock, knock on the side panel near the rear of the RV. I sat up, holding my breath. My first thought was animal. Maybe a bear testing, maybe a raccoon. I stayed still, heart climbing into my throat until it stopped. Minutes passed. I almost convinced myself I had dreamed it when it started again, this time on the opposite side. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed the flashlight I keep by the door and stepped down onto the damp ground. The beam cut through mist, sliding over wet leaves and the silver skin of the river. Nothing moved, not a paw print, not a rustle, just fog curling thick and low. When I circled back, I noticed something wrong with the tree line. The flashlight caught trunks that didn't align with how I remembered parking. It was as if the forest had shifted subtly forward, leaning closer, swallowing up a few feet of the clearing. I told myself it was the angle, the distortion of light in fog. Still, when I climbed back inside, I locked the door and couldn't fall asleep again. Morning brought sunlight, clean and golden, and with it, a wave of rationality. Night in the mountains makes everything stranger than it is. I made coffee, sat outside on a folding chair, and forced myself to enjoy the view. But then I looked back at the RV and felt a slow chill run through me. The wheels had sunk deeper into the earth, though it hadn't rained since yesterday. The ground around them was soft, too soft, like it had been loosened from below. When I pushed the stabilizer bar back up to check, the soil smelled raw, like something freshly overturned. By midday, I convinced myself to stay another night. Fear, I reasoned, shouldn't dictate my routes. I wasn't going to be the kind of traveler who ran at every strange sound or shadow. Still, as the sun fell, I kept glancing at the folded map on the passenger seat. Its edges looked darker now, the ink almost seeping outward, as if the paper itself were alive. That evening, the knocking returned. Louder this time, more deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I shouted, told whoever it was to cut it out, my voice ricocheting against the valley walls. The knocking stopped, and for a moment relief flooded through me. But then from somewhere deeper in the woods came 3 knocks in reply. That's when it hit me. It wasn't someone at my RV. It was the place itself. Echoing. Answering. The Appalachian vortexes. That's what the old man had called them, though he hadn't explained. Places where directions don't hold, where sound doesn't follow the rules, where reality bends a little too easily. I tried to sleep that night, but each time I drifted off, I dreamed of driving in circles, the same bend in the same road repeating, the trees watching with unblinking eyes. When dawn came, I packed. My chest was tight with the certainty that staying another night would mean losing something, my bearings, my mind, maybe more. I turned the key, shifted into drive, and pulled back onto the highway. Relief rose in me as I saw the green signs pointing east, toward towns, toward people. But 20 minutes later, my relief curdled. The road twisted, bent around a ridge, and deposited me back at the same pull-off by the river. My camp chair was still unfolded. My tire tracks were fresh in the mud. That was the first time I truly understood I might not be leaving. I killed the ignition and just sat there, my hands locked on the wheel, my throat dry. The air outside looked identical to yesterday's morning. Mist rising off the river, dew clinging to the grass, the smell of damp stone. Even the sound of the water lapping at the bank matched the rhythm I remembered from last night. It wasn't déjà vu. It wasn't memory. It was the same moment replaying itself, dressed up as a new day. I stepped out, testing the ground. The mud still bore my tread marks, sharp and recent, though I had driven away for nearly half an hour. My folding chair sat crooked, the seat damp with dew. The coffee mug I'd left out by mistake rested exactly where I'd abandoned it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and for a fleeting second I swore it was warm. That broke something inside me. I collapsed into the chair, head in my hands, whispering curses into the fog. This wasn't navigation error. I hadn't missed a turn or doubled back without realizing. The map in my head was solid, and I knew the Appalachian roads like a second skin after years of traveling. No, this was different. This was a trap. I thought about the old man again, the way his voice dropped to a near growl when he said, "Not all places stay where they're supposed to." I wondered how many others had ended up here, stuck in a loop, their stories fading into folklore. I didn't want to be one of them. So I decided to push harder. I drove again, this time without stopping, pushing the RV to its limits on curves that should have demanded respect. My tires squealed, the dishes rattled, and sweat beaded down my back as I leaned into each bend. Still, after what felt like hours, the same river appeared, the same clearing, my camp, my prison. I slammed the wheel with my palm and shouted until my voice cracked. Then I noticed something worse. On the picnic table beside the fire ring, there was a folded piece of paper weighed down by a stone. I hadn't put it there. I got out, every step reluctant, and picked it up. It was the same map the old man had given me, only this time the spiral roads looked thicker, darker, as if they'd been traced over. At the center of the spiral was a crude drawing of a door. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky letters, "Knock 3 times." The paper trembled in my hands, though the air was still. I stuffed it into my pocket and went back inside, locking the door behind me. For hours, I sat at the dinette table staring at nothing, trying to make sense of it. Did the knocks I'd heard the night before have something to do with this? Were they warnings or invitations? The sun dipped, shadows stretching long, and once again, silence drowned the campground. No cicadas, no owls, just the hollow quiet pressing into my ears. Then, right on cue, came the knocking. This time it wasn't random. It was precise. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, remembering the note. My hand hovered near the table, where I'd laid it down. Against every ounce of instinct in me, I whispered to myself, what if it's the only way out? I didn't knock back. Not yet. Instead, I pressed my ear to the RV wall, feeling the vibration echo through thin aluminum. The knocks came again, not from outside, but from within the frame itself, like the walls were hollow and something lived inside them. My chest tightened, air burning in my lungs. I yanked open a cabinet, half expecting to find an arm reaching through. Nothing but canned food and dust. Still, the knocking persisted, rhythmic and patient. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for dawn to free me. But when pale light finally filtered through the trees, I realized I wasn't free at all, because the clearing had changed. The river was gone. The trees stood closer, crowding right up to the edge of the RV. The clearing had shrunk, like the world was folding inward. The air felt tighter, heavier, as if there were fewer molecules left to breathe. I stumbled outside, heart hammering, and turned in circles. No water, no road, just trees stretching endless in every direction where their bark slick with morning dew. The air reeked of iron, metallic and sharp like blood on cold steel. Panic crawled into me, but I fought it down. I told myself to move, to mark a path, to do anything that meant progress. I grabbed orange trail tape from the storage bay and tied it to branches as I walked, counting steps. 50, 100, 200. When I turned back, my stomach dropped. The tape was gone. Branches hung bare where I'd tied them. No sign of nylon, no torn edges. Just unmarked trees staring back at me, their trunks slick and silent. I ran. My breath tore out of me in ragged gasps, my boots slipping on moss. I ran until my legs burned, until my chest felt ready to burst. And when I stopped, bent over, desperate for air, I looked up and saw my RV again, sitting calmly in the clearing. The door stood open. I hadn't left it open. I crept closer, sweat chilling on my skin, every instinct screaming to turn back. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. No drawers pulled out, no food stolen. But the note on the table was gone. In its place lay something new. A key, rusted and pitted, its teeth jagged and uneven. Attached was a scrap of paper with 2 words, "Knock back." I sat down hard, head spinning. My rational mind tried to build walls against what was happening, to label it illusion, exhaustion, anything. But reality here was no longer following the rules, and the only choice I had left was whether I played along. That night, when the knocking came again, steady and deliberate, I lifted the key in one hand and pressed my knuckles to the wall with the other. 3 sharp taps. My answer. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no heartbeat in my ears, just a void swallowing sound. And then, from deep within the forest, something knocked back. The knock from the forest wasn't just sound, it carried weight. The air shifted with it, as though the trees themselves had inhaled and exhaled in response to me. I dropped the key on the table and backed away, my knees trembling. My RV suddenly felt too small, too fragile, like a shell barely separating me from something vast and waiting. I sat in darkness, the blinds pulled down, every light off. My breath fogged faintly in the air, though it wasn't cold outside. I hugged my knees to my chest, listening, waiting. For a long time, nothing else happened, but sleep finally took me, hard and merciless. I woke to footsteps. They circled the RV, slow and heavy, the kind that crushed twigs with intention. I froze in bed, every muscle screaming at me to remain still. The steps paused near the door, and the handle jiggled once, twice, before going still. I held my breath, but the silence that followed was worse. I couldn't tell if whoever, or whatever, it was still stood there. Minutes passed. My courage, if you could call it that, snapped. I grabbed the key, shoved it into my pocket, and flung the door open. Nobody. Just fog hanging thick as wool, clinging to the trees like spiderwebs. My own footprints from yesterday had vanished, the ground unbroken except for fresh depressions circling the RV, larger than human, almost hoof-like, pressed deep into the soil. I stumbled backward, shut the door, and locked it, though locks meant nothing here. My pulse thundered in my ears. If the forest wanted in, it already was. By noon, the fog still hadn't lifted. I paced inside the RV, my body screaming for escape, my mind reminding me that escape no longer meant roads and exits. This place wasn't geography. It was a loop, a snare, a vortex. I pulled the map from my pocket, unfolded it on the counter, and stared until my eyes burned. The spiral had thickened even more, the lines almost gouged into the paper. At the center, that door still waited, darker than ever. I touched the ink, and for a moment, it felt wet. That's when the idea hit me. Not from reason, but from desperation. If the spiral wanted me at the door, maybe going there was the only way forward, or the only way out. I loaded a backpack, flashlight, water, rope, knife. My fingers shook as I zipped it. I left the RV door unlocked because something told me locks didn't matter where I was going. The forest felt different the moment I stepped out, denser, the trunks closer, the canopy strangling the sky. I chose a direction at random and walked. Every few feet, I knocked on a tree with the rusted key. 3 sharp taps. Each time the forest answered. Faint, delayed, but clear. Knock. Knock, knock. It was guiding me, or luring me. I couldn't decide which, but I followed anyway because staying put meant waiting to rot. Hours bled away, though the sun never seemed to move. Hunger gnawed at me, my canteen emptied too quickly, but still I kept knocking, kept listening. At last, I stumbled into a clearing, and there it was. The door. It stood alone, upright in the middle of the grass, framed by nothing. No walls, no hinges, just wood warped with age, its surface scarred by claw marks. The handle was iron, black and cold. Around it, the air shimmered faintly like heat above asphalt. I circled it once, afraid to get close. From the back, it was nothing, just empty air. But when I stepped in front again, I swear I heard breathing, slow and deep, coming from the other side. I pulled the key from my pocket. My palm was slick with sweat as I lifted it, lining up the jagged teeth with the rusted lock. It slid in too easily, as though the door had been waiting for this. I hesitated, every survival instinct screaming at me to stop. But then I thought of the endless loop, the shrinking clearing, the whispers that clawed at my sanity. If I didn't open this, I'd never leave. So I turned the key. The lock clicked. The door groaned open an inch. A gust of air rushed out, cold and damp, reeking of iron and earth. And beneath it, something faint. Voices. Not words, but tones. Familiar tones. I leaned closer. The sound sharpened into laughter, my own laughter. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The voices were mine, my voice echoing a dozen times, layered and distorted. They overlapped in waves of amusement, cruel and hollow, as though mocking me for even coming this far. The door creaked wider, though I hadn't touched it. The darkness beyond wasn't empty. It moved. Shapes writhed just out of sight, shifting like shadows against water. They whispered now, not in laughter, but in perfect imitation of my voice. "Come through. You've already been here. You'll always be here." I couldn't breathe. My legs shook so hard I nearly fell. I knew with absolute certainty that stepping through meant surrender. Not death exactly, but worse. Becoming one of the voices. Another echo trapped in the spiral. And yet the pull was strong. The air around the door throbbed, tugging me closer, the way deep water draws you under. My mind screamed run, but my body leaned forward, my fingers stretched out, brushing cold wood. That's when the forest knocked again. 3 sharp raps behind me this time, snapping me out of the trance. I spun, gasping, the key still clutched in my hand. Nothing stood there, just trees stretching endless, their bark wet, their branches clawing the mist. But the sound had been real. Something else wanted me to stop. I slammed the door shut, yanked the key out, and bolted. I ran until my lungs tore, until my legs gave out beneath me. When I finally collapsed, the forest was different again. I lay sprawled in mud, staring up at stars through a break in the canopy. Stars, real, sharp, steady points of light. I hadn't seen the sky in days. My chest heaved with relief. Maybe I'd escaped. Maybe the door had been the test and refusing it had broken the loop. But when I pushed myself up, wiping dirt from my hands, my stomach turned cold. Because there, just a few yards away, stood my RV. And the door was wide open. The sight of my RV nearly buckled me. Relief and dread clashed inside me so hard I could hardly breathe. It stood there, familiar and solid, the white paint dulled by dirt, the awning retracted just as I'd left it. But the door yawned open, swinging slightly, with no wind to push it. I wanted to believe it was safety. Shelter. A way back to something that belonged to me. Yet every instinct whispered it was bait. Still, the forest behind me felt thicker by the second, its trunks closing in like prison bars. I couldn't linger. I forced my legs to move, stumbling toward the steps, the key heavy in my pocket. The closer I came, the more wrong details stood out. My folding chair was set up again, though I'd collapsed it before I left. A mug sat on the table outside, steaming as though freshly poured. And on the driver's seat, visible through the windshield, was a silhouette, my silhouette. I froze. The figure sat with its hands on the wheel, head tilted forward, perfectly still. My gut twisted. I knew with a horrible certainty that if I opened the door, I'd see myself staring back. The key burned against my thigh. Maybe it wasn't meant for the forest door. Maybe it was meant for this. The steaming mug tipped me over the edge. I lunged up the steps, shoved the RV door wider, and stormed inside. Empty. No figure on the seat. No second version of me. Just silence, thick and watchful. The mug outside had gone cold. Its steam vanished, though I'd only seen it seconds ago. I dropped into the dinette bench, head in my hands, trying to hold on to something real. My heartbeat was the only thing that convinced me I hadn't dissolved into the madness of this place. Then I noticed the table. The map lay spread open again, but the spiral was gone. In its place was a crude drawing of my RV, shaded heavy in black ink. The door was marked with a jagged X. I shoved it away, but the paper clung to my fingers as though damp. I flung it toward the counter, but when it landed, it was blank. Just a sheet of brittle, yellowed parchment. My reflection in the microwave door caught my eye then. For a second, it didn't match me. The mouth moved before I did, curling into a smile my face didn't feel. I stumbled back, my chest seizing. The reflection blinked, slow and deliberate, as if savoring my reaction. Then it leaned forward, closer to the glass, and whispered, "You're already through." I ripped the plug from the socket, shattering the silence with the sound of tearing metal. The microwave went black, and with it the reflection. My own ragged breathing filled the RV, too loud, too fragile. I needed to leave, not the campground, not the road, leave all of it. The forest, the vortex, the loop. I didn't care if I had to abandon the RV, leave every possession behind. I just wanted to set foot somewhere the ground felt honest, where the air didn't carry voices that weren't mine. So I packed light, knife, flashlight, water, and stepped out again. The trees stood motionless, their bark slick with mist. But I didn't knock this time. I walked without marking, without guiding, refusing to play the forest's game. Every step felt heavier, the air thick like syrup. My boots sank into soil that clung as though reluctant to release me. Still, I pushed on, minutes stretched into hours. Hunger gnawed, thirst clawed, but I kept moving until my legs screamed. And then a sound cut through the silence. Running water. It was faint at first, but it grew louder with each desperate stride. I shoved branches aside, scratched raw by twigs, and broke through into another clearing. A river, broad, silver, alive, rolled before me. The air smelled fresher, cleaner, carried on the current. Relief nearly knocked me to my knees. I dropped to the bank, plunged my hands into the icy water, and drank until my stomach ached. For the first time in days, something felt real. But when I lifted my head, my relief shattered. Across the river, standing between two trees, was me. Not a reflection, not a shadow. A man with my face, my clothes, my stance. He stared, unmoving, eyes too dark in the pale light. His lips parted, and my own voice carried across the water. Wrong choice. The figure raised a hand and knocked 3 times on the tree beside him. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the valley like thunder. The current surged, water leapt higher, spraying cold against my skin, and from beneath the surface, shapes began to rise. Hands, pale and boneless, clawing at the air, reaching. The water boiled with them, a writhing mass of arms pulling at the bank. I scrambled backward, mud caking my palms, as the first of them broke free. They weren't people, not really. They were impressions of people, outlines filled with water and silt, faces shifting like liquid. Their mouths opened and closed soundlessly as they crawled toward me. I ran. My legs pumped fire, my lungs tore with each breath, but I didn't dare stop. The forest bent and twisted, paths doubling back, trees leaning closer, but I didn't care. I just ran until the world blurred. When my body finally gave out, I collapsed onto hard ground. Dirt, not mud. The air tasted cleaner, lighter. I lifted my head and realized I was on asphalt. A road. A real cracked, weed-split road winding through the mountains. My RV sat 20 feet away, crooked on the shoulder, its door closed. I should have felt relief. I should have wept. But instead, cold dread slid down my spine, because taped to the windshield, flapping gently in the breeze, was the map. Only one line was left on it now, a single arrow pointing downward, and beneath it, in my own handwriting, reflection comes last. The words on the map stole the air from my lungs. Reflection comes last. I hadn't written them, yet they curled across the page in my handwriting, the same uneven slope of the letters I'd seen on shopping lists and journal entries. The message clung to me like a cold hand on my neck. I tore the map from the windshield and crumpled it into my fist, but the paper resisted. It felt tougher than it should have, like animal hide instead of parchment. When I finally forced it into a ball and dropped it on the asphalt, the wind pushed it back against my boot. I stomped on it, ground it into the cracks of the road. The moment my heel lifted, the paper unfurled itself, perfectly flat again, and the words glared up at me as though they'd never been touched. Reflection comes last. The phrase looped in my head as I stood there on that lonely stretch of mountain road. I thought about the microwave reflection, about the other me across the river, about the silhouette behind the wheel. Had it all been leading here? Not to the forest, not to the door, but to something that had worn my face from the start? I forced myself back inside the RV. The air smelled faintly of iron again, metallic and sharp, and the blinds rattled though the windows were shut. I sat at the dinette table, staring at the key on the counter. My hands shook as I reached for it. If the key wasn't meant for the forest door, then what? My reflection? The idea made my skin crawl. But if the forest was truly done with me, if the road was here now, then maybe the last step was to confront the thing wearing my face. I caught sight of myself in the RV's darkened window. At first, it looked normal, my tired eyes, my dirt-streaked skin, but then the mouth twitched. Too wide, too deliberate. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. My reflection stayed put, grinning faintly, eyes sharp as broken glass, and then it lifted its hand and tapped the glass 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was inside my skull. I squeezed the key in my fist until it bit into my palm. My chest heaved with panic, but I refused to let it win. I lunged forward, slammed my knuckles against the glass 3 times in return. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reflection leaned closer until its forehead pressed against the glass. The grin faded into something blank, almost mournful. Its lips moved, slow, deliberate, but no sound came. I pressed my ear to the window, desperate, trembling. And faintly, like a whisper underwater, I heard my own voice. Trade places. I recoiled, shaking my head, my throat raw. No. No way. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't me, and I wasn't giving it my life. But the reflection didn't vanish. It just watched me, silent now, patient. My own eyes boring into me, waiting. I lasted maybe an hour like that, pacing, shaking, muttering to myself like a madman. But eventually exhaustion dragged me down. I sat on the bed, my head dropping into my hands, my eyes closed for only a second. When I opened them, I was staring out the windshield from the driver's seat. My hands gripped the wheel. My reflection, the one inside the RV, sat on the bed, head in hands, exactly where I'd been. My scream clawed its way out of me, muffled by glass. I pounded the inside of the windshield, desperate to break through, but the other me didn't react. He just sat there, trembling, the key still clenched in his hand. I realized then I wasn't outside looking in. I was trapped in the reflection. The glass held me, pressed me flat, suffocating but endless. I could see everything, my RV, the road, the forest, but I couldn't touch it. I could only watch. The other me finally lifted his head, eyes glassy, lips moving. I expected him to gloat, to smirk. Instead, he whispered words I couldn't hear. Then he placed the key on the table, turned, and walked out the RV door. The moment he vanished, my prison shifted. The view warped, rippled like water. The road outside bent in on itself, folding until it formed the same spiral as the map. My chest seized. I tried to scream, but the sound rebounded inside the glass, bouncing endlessly, and then silence. I opened my eyes to find myself back on the bed. The RV was quiet. The reflection was gone. The map lay folded neatly on the counter, the key resting on top. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a hallucination, some fever dream born of dehydration and fear. But when I walked to the window, I saw something that told me otherwise. The road outside was gone. In its place stretched a mirror-flat surface, endless and gleaming, reflecting the trees above. I pressed my palm to the glass, and the reflection pressed back, perfectly in sync. My face looked exhausted, hollowed, but the eyes in the glass glittered with something alien. Reflection comes last. The phrase throbbed in my skull as the glass rippled. I felt the pull again, the same current as the door, tugging at my skin, and deep down I knew the truth. It didn't matter if I'd resisted the door. It didn't matter if I'd fled the river. The vortex wasn't a place, it was a process, a stripping away of layers until nothing remained but the echo, the reflection. I backed away, heart pounding, whispering to myself, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. Because if I fell asleep again, if I closed my eyes even for a moment, I knew I'd wake up on the wrong side of the glass for good. I didn't sleep. Not that night, not the next, though time in that place stopped obeying anyway. I sat with my back against the RV door, knife clutched tight in my lap, staring at the glass as though my will alone could keep it from swallowing me. My reflection sat opposite, mimicking me, twitching sometimes like a film reel skipping frames. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dimness as though light came from within. The silence stretched on until it wasn't silence at all. It became pressure, the kind of weight that builds inside your skull, pressing against bone until your thoughts feel like they'll crack. I whispered to myself, begged for morning, but the sky outside never changed. It was always twilight, always waiting. And then I remembered the knocks. The rhythm had guided me deeper, lured me toward the door, across the river, back into the spiral. But what if it wasn't just a lure? What if it was also the only way to fight back? The one rule of the vortex was that it answered. Knock, and it knocked back. Call, and it echoed. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn that against it. I forced myself up, legs trembling, and crossed to the counter. The key sat there, rusted and black. I picked it up, turned it over in my palm. My reflection did the same, but when I raised my knuckles to the glass and rapped 3 times, hard and deliberate, the reflection didn't answer. It smiled instead. My knees nearly buckled. But I didn't stop. I knocked again, louder, hard enough that the glass quivered. Knock, knock, knock. My reflection grinned wider, its lips curling unnaturally far. And then, from deep in the woods, the forest knocked back. The sound rattled the RV, shook the ground beneath me. 3 heavy raps that echoed through the valley. My reflection froze, its smile faltering. For the first time, it looked unsettled. I bared my teeth and slammed the key against the glass. Knock, knock, knock. Again, the forest answered, louder this time, the sound carrying like thunder. The reflection shuddered, its features blurring, its edges trembling as if the glass were melting. Not me, I hissed, slamming my fist again. You can't take me, not me. The forest roared with the rhythm. Knock after knock, an avalanche of sound, as if the trees themselves were pounding their fists in unison. My reflection convulsed, its face splitting into dozens of mine, all screaming silently, all dissolving into static. The glass rippled, cracked, splintered with a web of fractures, and then it shattered. The air imploded with a force that knocked me to my knees. I threw my arms over my head as shards flew outward, but none struck me. They hung in the air, spinning, glowing faintly before dissolving like ash. When I opened my eyes, the world outside had changed. No more endless twilight, no spiral roads, no mirror-smooth surfaces, just a 2-lane highway stretching across the blue ridge, sunlight painting the ridges gold. I stumbled outside, the air crisp and honest in my lungs. Birds sang, real and imperfect, not echoes. The road hummed beneath my boots, warm from the sun. Tears blurred my vision. I was free, or so I told myself, because when I turned back to the RV, its windows reflected me as they should. My dirt-streaked face, my hollowed eyes. But in the corner of the reflection just behind me, a figure lingered. My figure. Smiling faintly, waiting. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing there. But when I turned back to the glass, he was still there. I've been driving ever since. Town to town, campground to campground, never staying long. The road feels solid, the world feels real, but every time I glance in the mirror, I catch him. Just for a heartbeat, behind my shoulder, wearing my face. I don't know if I ever truly escaped the vortex or if it simply let me go, knowing it could reach me whenever it pleased. Sometimes at night, when the forest is thick around me and silence stretches too long, I knock against the wall of my RV, just to test it. And sometimes the forest still knocks back. So if you ever find yourself camping in the Appalachians and an old man hands you a map, don't take it. Don't trace its spirals. And for God's sake, if you hear knocking in the dark, never ever answer. Because once you do, you'll learn what I did. In the vortex, reality isn't broken. You are. I never thought a place could look so welcoming in daylight and so cursed by nightfall. That was my first mistake, believing that Ashwood Hollow was just another stop on the road. My name's Daniel Mercer, 41 years old, husband, father, the kind of man who always thought he had control of his own decisions. My wife, Elise, and I had been RV camping through Virginia that summer, tracing routes that wound through the Blue Ridge, chasing quiet campgrounds where cell service vanished and the air carried that damp, forested chill that reminded me of childhood campings with my dad. We wanted to give our 12-year-old daughter, Marin, the same kind of memories. Firelight on her cheeks, the smell of pine smoke in her hair, the kind of silence that makes you realize just how loud your regular life has become. We found Ashwood Hollow on a whim, marked by a warped wooden sign leaning at an angle, paint long since peeled away. It wasn't listed on any map I carried, but Elise liked the remoteness. No crowds, she smiled as we turned down the narrow dirt road. Just us. At first glance, it was everything we wanted. The campground opened into a flat clearing ringed by towering oaks that nodded together like hands overhead. Only 2 other RVs sat there, both older models with faded paint, quiet and still. The air was heavy with the smell of wet leaves and the distant murmur of water. I assumed a stream ran somewhere nearby. But there was something else too. As we rolled the RV into place, I noticed a figure of wood driven into the ground near the center of the clearing. A crude carving, 3 feet tall, hunched with hollow sockets for eyes. Not a sign, not art, not decoration. A totem, if I had to call it anything, though it looked less crafted and more gouged, as if made in haste. Marin asked if it was supposed to scare away animals. Elise laughed it off, but her laugh was thin, uncertain. I caught myself staring too long at the figure, the way its jagged teeth had been cut into the wood, the way the bark seemed darker around its mouth, like it had been scorched. Still, we set up camp. I backed the RV near the tree line, while Elise unfolded the camp chairs and Marin ran circles around us, thrilled to stretch her legs. We got the fire started early, roasted hot dogs, and for a few golden hours, it felt right. The oaks swayed, fireflies winked into life, and Elise leaned against me on the folding bench, her warmth familiar and steady. But then came night. It wasn't the usual kind of darkness that seeps gently in. No, this one fell fast, smothering the light from our lanterns as if the forest swallowed it whole. By the time I zipped my jacket, the other 2 RVs had gone silent, blinds drawn, no sign of life inside. The fire cracked and popped, the only light in the clearing, and every shadow seemed to bend toward us. That was when I heard it. A knock. Not loud, not urgent, just measured. 3 taps, then stillness. It came from the tree line behind the totem. Elise stiffened beside me. "You heard that?" she whispered. I wanted to say it was just branches falling. I wanted to say it was nothing at all. But Marin had stopped mid-step, her marshmallow half melted on the stick, eyes fixed on the dark between the trees. She had heard it too. Another knock. 3 again. Slow. Deliberate. I stood, my boots crunching the soil. My flashlight beam cut through the first row of trees, the pale bark glowing back at me, but nothing moved. Nothing but the shifting mist that had crept in around our ankles. When I turned back, Marin had edged closer to the RV, eyes wide. Elise whispered, "Let's go inside." We did. I double-locked the door, slid the blinds shut, and tried to laugh it off for their sake. Probably a woodpecker, or someone messing around from the other RVs. But my own words didn't sound right. I knew the rhythm of a woodpecker, fast, erratic. This had been different, intentional, human. The night stretched long. Every creak of the RV's frame sounded like movement outside. Around midnight, as I sat awake at the small table, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Through the sliver in the blinds, I saw the totem. Only, it wasn't where it had been. It stood closer, just a foot or 2, but closer. I froze, staring until my eyes watered. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that the shadows were playing tricks, but by 2 in the morning, when I checked again, it was closer still. I didn't wake Elise or Marin. Not yet. I told myself I would wait until morning. Just make it until morning. But morning didn't bring relief. When the light finally broke through the canopy, I stepped outside, breath fogging in the cool air. The totem was right there, less than 5 feet from our RV steps. No footprints in the soil, no drag marks, just standing, as if it had grown there overnight. Elise came out behind me, one hand covering her mouth. Marin clung to her arm. I tried to play it off, said maybe someone was pulling a prank. But when I looked toward the other RVs, one of them was gone. Just gone, vanished before sunrise, leaving only flat grass where it had been parked. I should have left then. We all should have. But something in me wanted to stand my ground. Pride, maybe, or denial. We'll give it one more night, I told Elise. If anything else happens, we'll go. That day we tried to carry on. We hiked a narrow path we found behind the campground, followed the sound of the stream, skipped stones, and pretended we weren't unsettled. The woods were beautiful, I'll admit that. Sunlight dappled the moss, birds flickered overhead, and for a few hours the fear thinned. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced back, I swore I saw the figure between the trees, not moving, not advancing, just there, as if it followed at a distance, appearing wherever we paused too long. By the time dusk fell again, my chest was tight with unease. I told Elise I'd keep the fire going late, that maybe it was just some local trying to spook campers. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever that totem was, it wasn't just wood. When the knocking started again that night, it came from both sides of the clearing. 3 taps to the left. Pause. 3 taps to the right, like something circling. Marin began to cry softly, pressing her face into her mom's shoulder. Elise shot me a look, pleading, terrified. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, jaw clenched. Then came the whisper, a voice, low and stretched, like bark splitting in winter cold. Just one word carried through the clearing. Leave. The voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It carried like a vibration through the clearing, a sound you feel more in your bones than in your ears. Elise clutched Marin tighter, and I stood frozen, flashlight beam trembling against the tree line. Leave. The word hung there, stretched by silence. My throat was so dry it burned when I swallowed. I wanted to shout back, ask who was there, demand they stop, but my tongue felt pinned in place. The only sound was the fire snapping, its glow fighting against the press of the dark. Then the knocking resumed. Left, right, behind us. Always in threes. I swept the flashlight across the clearing, catching nothing but trunks and mist. But when the beam passed over the totem, my breath caught. It was gone. 1 second it was there by the RV steps, the next, empty ground. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the folding chair. Elise whispered, "Daniel, please, just go. We can leave right now." I almost said yes. Almost. But some deep stubbornness rose in me. This was our trip, our ground, our right to be here. I thought if I gave in, if I let whoever or whatever this was chase us out, I'd be admitting defeat. So I told her, inside, we'll lock up, we'll wait it out. We heard it inside, blinds shut tight. I kept the flashlight and a kitchen knife within reach, as if either would make a difference. The RV was quiet except for Marin's soft whimpers and the ticking of the stovetop clock. Hours dragged. I thought maybe it was done, maybe the whispers and knocks would fade with the night. But around 3 a.m., a heavy thud shook the side of the RV. Not a knock. Something slamming hard against the metal. Elise gasped. Marin let out a strangled cry. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound came again. This time lower down against the wheels, like hands or claws testing the weight of the frame. I gripped the knife tighter, every muscle screaming at me to fling the door open, to confront whatever was out there. But then I heard it again. That whisper, closer now, curling against the windows. Leave. Only this time, it didn't sound like one voice. It sounded like many, layered together, rising and falling like wind through dead leaves. I forced myself to stay still, to keep breathing until the sounds faded. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I don't even remember closing my eyes, just waking to pale gray daylight spilling through the blinds. When I stepped outside, I found the totem again. It stood where our campfire had been, driven deep into the ash. Its carved mouth was darker, wet-looking, and around it, the soil was marked with shapes. Long impressions, not quite footprints, not quite animal, as if something had dragged itself in a circle around us. That was the breaking point. I told Elise to pack everything. We were leaving, no questions, no delays. She didn't argue. Marin stayed glued to her side, silent, hollow-eyed. By 9 a.m., the RV was running. I gripped the wheel, heart pounding with relief as the dirt road stretched ahead. But the forest seemed thicker than before, the oaks pressing closer, branches arching low. The road wound in ways I didn't remember, curves sharper, shadows darker. And then, after 10 minutes of driving, we passed the sign again. That leaning board, the faded paint, Ashwood Hollow. My chest went cold. Somehow we'd loop back to the entrance. "No," Elise whispered. "You didn't turn around?" "I didn't," I swore, hands tight on the wheel. "I've been driving straight." I pressed on, refusing to stop, refusing to let the panic show. The road twisted, dipped, climbed, and then again, the sign. Ashwood Hollow. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The road was trapping us, curling back on itself like a snake devouring its tail. I slammed the brakes, gravel spitting under the tires. Elise grabbed my arm. What do we do? Before I could answer, Marin pointed out the window. The totem stood in the middle of the road. Just there, waiting, its hollow eyes boring into us. I couldn't drive forward, couldn't risk hitting it, not because of the wood, but because some primal part of me knew it wasn't wood anymore. It was something else, something that would welcome the collision. I backed up slowly, but the forest shifted again, trees knitting closer, the path narrowing until the RV scraped against bark on both sides. We were trapped. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. We walk, I said. My voice shook, but I tried to steady it. We'll leave the RV if we have to. Just grab essentials. Elise looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You want to walk with Marin? What choice do we have? Her silence was answer enough. We packed backpacks, water, snacks, flashlights, a first aid kit. I shoved the knife in my belt, though it felt laughable. Before stepping out, I turned back to the RV, the vehicle that had carried us state to state, memory to memory. I didn't know if we'd ever see it again. The forest swallowed us whole within minutes. The path underfoot was more suggestion than trail, roots knotting across damp soil. The air was dense, heavy with the smell of rot. I held Elise's hand, Marin's fingers laced in hers, all of us tethered together in that suffocating green. For a while, I thought we were making progress. The stream's murmur grew louder and sunlight pierced through the canopy in fractured beams. But then I saw them, carvings on the trees, dozens of them. The same hollow eyes, the same jagged mouths as the totem, some fresh sap still glistening, others old, bark grown thick around their wounds. They stared from every direction, a forest of watchers. Marin whimpered. Elise whispered, "Don't look at them, just keep moving." We did, but the whispers followed, always just behind us, low and indistinct, like breath in the hollow of the trees. By midday, the stream came into view. Relief surged in me. We could follow water, maybe reach a road, maybe find help. But when we stepped to the bank, I froze. The stream wasn't flowing. The water was still, stagnant, black as tar. And there, half submerged in the muck, was another totem, larger, taller than me. Its mouth wide open, its carved teeth sharp and splintered, and as I stared, the water rippled. Something was moving beneath. I tightened my grip on Marin's hand before she could step closer. The water looked thick, almost oily, its surface broken only by that slow, deliberate ripple. The totem's shadow cut across it, the carved mouth yawning open like it wanted to swallow the whole stream. "We're not crossing here," I said. My voice was low, too low, but Elise caught the warning. She tugged Marin back and we skirted the edge of the bank, but the ripple followed us. No matter where we moved along the water, that widening ring swelled outward as if something beneath was pacing our steps. At one point, Elise whispered, "Maybe it's a fish," but she didn't believe it, and neither did I. The sound was wrong. Not the splash of fins, but a dragging beneath the surface, a pull that displaced the water in long, deliberate strokes. We turned away, cutting back into the trees. For a moment, the air cleared, sunlight filtered brighter, birds even dared to call overhead. My shoulders dropped a fraction, enough for me to think maybe we'd shaken it. Then came the smell. At first faint, like damp earth, then stronger, sour, coppery, thick enough that I gagged. Marin pressed her nose into Elise's sleeve, muffling a whimper. Elise asked, "What is that?" But the answer formed before I wanted it to. Blood. The scent led us to a clearing, and there, arranged in a circle, were bones. Not animal, human. Long femurs bleached by weather. Ribs stacked in patterns, like someone had tried to mimic the lattice of the trees. Skulls set on stones, hollow eyes fixed on the center of the ring. And in that center, another totem, this one small, almost delicate, but painted red with something that hadn't yet dried. Elise staggered back, clutching Marin against her chest. I stepped forward before I realized I was moving, as if something in that circle pulled me in. My boots sank into the damp soil, and I swear I felt a vibration underfoot, like the ground itself was humming. The whisper rose again, not around us this time, from below, from the soil. Leave. The word vibrated through my bones, rattled my teeth. I stumbled back, dragging Elise and Marin with me, and we ran. No direction, no plan, just away. Branches clawed at us, roots snagged our boots, but fear carried us farther than reason could. When we finally stopped gasping, I realized the sun had dipped. Shadows stretched long, the forest darkening faster than it should have. Elise clutched her knees, shaking. Marin wouldn't let go of her hand. I scanned the trees, every nerve alert. That was when I saw the light. A lantern, swaying between the trunks. I almost cried with relief. Someone's here. Elise looked up, eyes wide with hope and fear tangled together. Are you sure? The lantern bobbed closer, its glow golden, nay, warm. I shouted, "Hey, over here!" It didn't answer, just kept swaying, steady and slow, like it was being carried by someone taking measured steps. But no figure emerged. No crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs, just light moving toward us. Marin whispered, "Dad, no one's holding it." She was right. As it neared, I saw the handle swinging in the air, suspended, as if an invisible hand gripped it. We backed away. The lantern drifted closer, its flame brightening, growing, until it flared white-hot, and went out. We were plunged into black. Elise clamped her hand over Marin's mouth to stifle a scream. I fumbled for my flashlight, thumb slipping over the switch, until the beam finally cut on. It sliced through the dark and landed on a totem. 2 feet away. I staggered back, nearly dropping the light. This one was different. Its eyes gouged deeper, its mouth stretched wider, and as I stared, I realized its position mirrored mine. My arm raised, my stance bent, like it had copied me. The flashlight flickered. When it steadied again, the totem was gone. I don't remember how we moved after that. Only that panic drove us, stumbling, half-dragging Marin through the underbrush. The forest grew thicker, the oaks taller, their bark twisting into faces that seemed almost alive. At last, through the weave of branches, I saw it. A roofline. A cabin, hunched low against the trees. I didn't think, I just ran for it. The door was half-rotted, but it gave way under my shoulder. We spilled inside, coughing on the dust that rose like smoke. The place was bare but intact. 4 walls, a hearth cold with ash, a table scarred by years of use. No power, no sign of life. We sank onto the floor, backs against the wall, hearts pounding in unison. For the first time since the knocking began, I felt the faintest thread of safety. But then Marin pointed to the far wall. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Daddy," I turned. Carvings. Every inch of wood was etched with them. Hundreds of faces, hollow-eyed, mouths jagged, overlapping, crowding each other. And in the center, carved larger than the rest, was a figure holding a lantern. I staggered closer. The details were crude, but I knew what it was. What we had just seen. Elise whispered, "We shouldn't be here." I agreed. But before I could say it, the whispers began again, louder now, layered voices pressing in from every wall. "Leave, leave, leave." And then beneath that chorus, softer, different, a single voice. A child's. "Stay." Marin whimpered and buried her face against her mother. Elise clutched her tight, rocking without realizing it. My hands shook so badly I dropped the flashlight, and its beam crawled across the floor. That's when I saw it. Not carved, not painted. Real. A footprint. Small. Bare. Pressed into the dust. It led deeper into the cabin, toward a door at the back I hadn't noticed before. I should have turned away. I should have gathered my family and run into the night. Forest be damned. But something in that footprint called to me, the same way the totems had, the same way the voice had threaded itself into my thoughts. I lifted the flashlight, stepped toward the door, and pulled it open. Stairs descended into darkness. The air that rose from the stairwell was colder than it should have been, like opening a freezer that had never known warmth. It carried the smell of damp earth, but threaded through it was something sharper, metallic, the same copper tang I'd smelled in the bone circle. Elise's voice cracked behind me. "Daniel, don't." But I was already stepping down, flashlight beam jerking against the walls. Each board creaked under my weight, brittle, as if the whole staircase might collapse. Marin whimpered softly, and Elise hushed her, but neither followed. I think some part of me wanted them to stay behind, far from whatever waited below. The stairs ended in dirt. A cellar carved straight from the ground, low ceiling braced with rough beams. My light crawled across jars lined on a shelf, filled with something dark, suspended, unidentifiable. The smell was stronger here, thick enough I covered my mouth with my sleeve. And then I saw it. Another totem. But this one wasn't carved from wood. It was bone. Skulls fused together, ribs lashed into a frame, femurs sharpened into crude stakes. The hollows of the eye sockets glared from every angle, and at the center a child's skull, smaller than the rest, set like a crown. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The flashlight beam trembled across the walls and froze on a phrase carved deep into the packed dirt. The totem warns. The letters were jagged, gouged by someone who had written them with desperation, maybe even with their bare hands. A sound stirred behind me. Soft, bare feet on dirt. I spun the light around. Marin stood halfway down the stairs. Elise was behind her, face pale as chalk. I shouted, too sharply, "Go back up!" But Marin's eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on the bone totem. Wide, unblinking. "It's calling," she whispered. My stomach dropped. Elise rushed down, scooping her into her arms, but Marin thrashed, her little arms clawing at the air, reaching toward the totem. Elise dragged her back, voice breaking. "Daniel, help me!" I lunged, grabbed Marin's legs, and together we hauled her up the stairs. She screamed, not words, just a raw animal sound that didn't sound like my daughter. We slammed the door shut. I pushed the table across it, the wood screeching over the floor. Marin collapsed in Elise's arms, sobbing, whispering over and over, "It wants us to listen." I dropped to my knees, chest heaving. My flashlight beam landed on the carvings again, and for the first time I noticed something I had missed. Among the faces etched into the walls, one was fresh. Cleaner cuts, wood shavings still at its base, and it wasn't hollow-eyed like the rest. It was Marin's face. I snapped the light away, my vision swimming. Elise rocked her, tears streaking her cheeks. "We have to get out," she whispered. "We can't stay here. We can't." I nodded, though I had no plan. The forest outside was a maze, the RV unreachable, but staying meant waiting for the voices to close in. The decision was made for us. The table shuddered, at first a tremor, then a violent jolt as if something pressed from the other side. Dust fell from the ceiling. The wood groaned. "Leave." The voices roared, louder than ever, rattling every nail in the walls, and threaded beneath them, clear, sharp, a child's voice again. "Stay." Marin sat up, face streaked with tears, but her expression eerily calm. "It doesn't want all of us, just me." The room tilted, my stomach clenched. Elise pulled her close, shaking her head violently. "No, no, baby, don't you say that." But Marin's eyes were far away, as if listening to something deep inside the walls. I snapped. "We're leaving. Now." We bolted out the front door, into the forest. The air was thick, night pressing down though the sun shouldn't have set yet. I dragged them both through the underbrush, following nothing but instinct, nothing but the pounding in my chest. But the forest bent. Every direction curved back on itself, landmarks repeating, the same twisted oak, the same fallen log. Elise tripped, knees hitting the dirt. Marin still clutched to her chest. I pulled them up, but the weight of despair settled like lead in my bones. That was when we heard it. Not whispers this time. Singing. A child's voice, lilting, high, carrying through the trees. Words I couldn't make out, but the melody was wrong. Crooked, like a lullaby twisted backwards. Elise covered Marin's ears, but she fought, struggling to hear. The song circled us, moving from tree to tree until it felt like the forest itself was humming. My knees buckled. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound bled through, vibrating in my skull. Then ahead, a clearing opened, and in the center stood a massive totem. Taller than any tree around it, roots of bone and wood fused together, faces carved by the dozens, mouths gaping. Lanterns hung from its branches, glowing faintly though no flame burned within. Marin wriggled free of Elise's grip and walked toward it. I lunged, caught her wrist. "No!" She turned to me, and for a split second her eyes weren't her own. hollow, dark. "It warned us," she said in a voice not hers. "You didn't listen." I pulled her back, but the ground beneath the totem split with a crack like thunder. The soil yawned open, darkness spilling upward, cold air rushing out like breath. The whispers roared all at once, thousands of voices weaving into a single command. Leave. I staggered back, clutching Elise and Marin, as the totem leaned, groaning, its carved mouths twisting. The lanterns swung wildly, spilling their pale glow over the clearing, and in that glow I saw them. Figures. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Thin, gray, their shapes wavering like smoke, hollow eyes burning faintly. They crawled from the fissure, dragged themselves from behind trees, circled the clearing, not alive, not dead, bound to this place. Ashwood Hollow wasn't a campground. It was a graveyard, and we were trespassers. They closed in slowly, not with the hunger of predators, but with the inevitability of a tide. Gray forms swayed, hollow eyes fixed on us, every movement jerky, like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. Their mouths opened and closed soundlessly, except for one thing. Every time a jaw clicked shut, the same word rolled through the clearing. Leave. The voices weren't coming from the figures themselves. They rose from the totem, from the trees, from the ground under our feet. Every root, every stone, every shadow had joined in the command. Elise clutched Marin, both of them pressed against me so tightly I could feel their trembling through my chest. My knife felt like a toy, my flashlight beam, a laughable shield against what loomed in every direction. "Stay behind me," I whispered, though my voice cracked. One of the gray forms broke from the circle, crawling on all fours with its limbs bent backward, joints cracking as it scuttled across the dirt. It stopped inches from my boots, head snapping up so fast the hollow eyes blurred in the light. Its mouth opened wide, wider, wider still, until the jaw splintered. From that cavern of darkness, the child's voice drifted out again. "Stay." Marin jerked toward it as though pulled by a rope. Elise screamed and tightened her hold, but our daughter writhed, her face twisted with longing. "It's not her," I hissed. "It's not her voice." But a darker thought gnawed at me. What if it was? What if that voice belonged to a child who had been here once, caught in this place, bound to the totems, a child who had never left? The circle pressed tighter. Lanterns on the totem flickered, light stuttering over faces carved into its trunk. Each one looked different, men, women, children. Some looked ancient, some recent, and one of them, unmistakably, was mine. My own face, gouged into the wood. I staggered, bile rising in my throat. Elise saw it too, her breath hitching in horror. "They already know us," I whispered. "They've been watching since the moment we arrived." The fissure beneath the totem widened, soil splitting like rotted fabric. A cold wind surged from it, howling through the branches, whipping Elise's hair across her face. The gray figures dropped to their knees as if in worship, hollow eyes never leaving us. Something was coming. A shape began to rise from the darkness, larger than the rest, limbs too long, head crowned with antlers that scraped the branches overhead. Its body was half-formed, half-rotted, dripping soil and bone. When it opened its mouth, the word didn't come as a whisper anymore. It came as a roar. "Leave." I grabbed Elise's arm. "Run." We broke through the circle, the figures clawing at us, brittle fingers tearing at our clothes. I swung the knife wildly, not caring if it cut. Each time the blade met flesh, or whatever passed for it, the form burst into ash, dissolving into the wind. But there were too many. Dozens swarmed from the fissure, clawing out of the soil, rising from the tree line. Their whispers drowned out the pounding of my blood. "Leave, leave, leave." I ran blind, dragging my family, flashlight beam bouncing, lungs burning. Every path looked the same, black trunks, snarled roots, endless dark. Then, through the chaos, I saw it. Metal, shining faintly in the lantern light. The RV. We burst into the clearing where we had first parked, and my knees nearly gave under me at the sight. The RV sat exactly where we'd left it, door closed, blinds drawn. The fire pit was cold, only blackened ash inside, and standing in front of the steps, the totem. It had returned, only now it towered taller, chest high, its carved mouth dripping dark resin that smelled like blood. I raised the knife, rage flooding through my terror. I wanted to smash it, to hack it to splinters. But before I could move, Elise's voice cracked behind me. "Daniel, look!" She pointed to the RV windows. Something moved inside. Shadows, figures, one tall, one small, shapes that mirrored us exactly. A man, a woman, a child. My breath seized. It was us. Our doubles. They stood at the window, hollow-eyed, their mouths moving in unison. "Leave." I stumbled back, knife clattering from my grip. My reflection, or whatever it was, pressed a hand to the glass. For a moment I thought I felt the pressure against my own palm, as if something inside the RV had reached through the air and touched me. The door creaked open, empty inside. Silent. I knew what the totem wanted. It wasn't warning us anymore. It was offering us a choice. Go inside, take our place, become part of the hollow, or stay outside where the figures swarmed and the antlered shape rose higher, blotting the tree line with its shadow. Elise's voice was barely a whisper. "Daniel, what do we do?" I looked at Marin. Her small hand clutched Elise's shirt, her eyes wide, caught between terror and the strange calm that had overtaken her before. She whispered one word, "Home." And I realized with gut-sick certainty, we had no home to go back to, not anymore, not if we stayed. The forest shook, the fissure widening, roots tearing free, soil collapsing. The totem leaned, its carved mouths stretching in a silent scream. The antlered figure began to crawl forward on all fours, dragging its massive body toward us. I grabbed Elise's hand, pulled Marin close, and made the only choice left. We ran for the RV. The steps groaned under our weight as we rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind us. For one trembling moment, it was just the three of us again, our ragged breaths filling the small space, our bodies pressed together in the dark. But something was wrong. The air smelled different, damp, metallic, as if the walls themselves had been soaking in the soil. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock over the kitchen sink, gone. It was silent in a way the RV had never been silent before. I flicked on the interior lights. They didn't come on. Instead, the lanterns outside the totem flared through the blinds, casting thin beams across the inside of our RV. And in that sickly light, I realized this wasn't exactly our RV at all. The couch cushions sagged with rot, stuffing spilling out in gray clumps. The cabinets hung open, their doors splintered. Every surface was coated in a thin film of dust and ash, as if decades had passed since anyone had set foot inside. This isn't ours," Elise whispered, clutching Marin tighter. But it was. The picture we'd pinned to the fridge, the one of Marin with her missing front tooth, still clung to the metal, edges curled. My jacket still hung on the hook by the door. Our things were here, but aged, ruined, hollowed by time. A cold shiver raced down my spine. "Daniel," Elise said, voice cracking, "we didn't come back. We never came back." Something tapped against the window. We all froze. A face peered in from the dark, its hollow eyes pressed against the glass. It was me, or something wearing my face. Its mouth moved soundlessly, then twisted into a smile that split too wide. I yanked the blinds shut, heart pounding. "We can't stay here," I said. "We need to drive. Now." I pushed toward the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I jammed the keys into the ignition. I turned them. Nothing. The engine didn't cough, didn't click. The dashboard lights stayed dead. I turned again, harder, the key biting into my palm. Still nothing. Behind me, Elise let out a sharp gasp. I turned. Marin wasn't beside her anymore. She was standing in the middle of the RV, eyes blank, lips moving. "Marin?" I croaked. She pointed toward the hallway leading to the bedroom, her little finger trembling. "They're waiting." Before I could move, the door at the end of the hall creaked open. Light spilled out. Not the dull yellow of our RV's bulbs, but a pale, bluish glow, like moonlight trapped indoors. And within it, shadows shifted. Voices drifted through the opening. Familiar voices. My voice. Elise's. Marin's. Laughter. Conversation. As if we were already inside, living another life. One step beyond that door. Elise grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't open it. Please, Daniel, don't." But Marin was already walking toward it, slow and steady, like a sleepwalker. I lunged, scooping her up. She screamed, thrashing in my arms, her voice raw with fury I'd never heard from her before. "Let me go! They want me! They said I can stay!" Her words cut like blades. "Who?" I demanded, holding her tighter. "Who said that?" Her eyes flicked to the door, and for the first time her voice wasn't hers. It was older, deeper, a chorus. The hollow. The door at the end of the hall swung wider. The light thickened, spilling across the carpet like liquid. From within it, shapes began to emerge. Our doubles stepping out of the glow. First me, my hollow-eyed twin, movements stiff, a knife dangling loosely from his hand. Then Elise. Her double's head tilted unnaturally, her smile frozen, her arms outstretched as if to embrace. And then Marin. That broke me. Her double skipped forward, her missing tooth grin twisted with black gums, eyes bottomless pits. She giggled, and the sound was both my daughter's laughter and something foul layered beneath it. Elise whimpered, covering her mouth. "God, no." The three doubles stepped into the RV, their bodies brushing past the walls as if they weren't entirely solid, as if they belonged to the wood, the metal, the air itself. I backed up, clutching Marin, my back hitting the kitchen counter. Elise pressed close, trembling so violently I could feel it in my bones. "What do you want?" I shouted at them. The hollow-eyed version of me tilted its head, mouth moving in silence. Then all three spoke together, their voices weaving into one, layered and inhuman. "You. To stay." The light surged, filling the RV, blinding. I dropped to my knees, covering Marin's face, pulling Elise down with me. The doubles loomed closer, their features dissolving into ash and light, their arms reaching. I thought it was the end. I thought the hollow had swallowed us. Then a sound cut through it all, a sharp, piercing knock. Not at the bedroom door, at the RV's front door. Once, twice, 3 times. The light wavered, the doubles froze, their heads jerking toward the sound. The air grew cold, biting my skin. Another knock. Harder this time, rattling the frame. Elise's eyes met mine, wide and desperate. Something else was out there, something that didn't belong to the hollow, or worse, something deeper than it. The knocking grew louder, faster, until it became a pounding, shaking the RV on its axles. And then a voice spoke through the door, low and rough, human in a way nothing here had been. "Open up, before it's too late." The pounding on the door shook the RV harder each time, rattling the windows in their frames, sending dust and ash drifting from the ceiling. The doubles stood frozen in the glow behind us, their faces turned toward the noise, their bodies twitching like puppets pulled between two masters. "Open up," the voice called again, deeper this time, almost urgent. "Now, before it finds you." Elise clung to my arm, shaking her head violently. "Don't, Daniel. Don't open it." But the alternative was staring me down, the hollow-eyed versions of ourselves. They hadn't moved, but I could feel their intent pressing against me, heavier than gravity, pulling me toward them. Every second the knocking grew louder, the doubles grew sharper, more real, their eyes glinting with hunger. Marin whimpered in my arms. She looked from the door to her own double and whispered, "Daddy, I think it's me. At the door. I think I'm knocking." Her words chilled my blood. I crouched, pressing my forehead against hers. "No, baby, you're here. You're with us." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. What if something outside had her voice now, the way the hollow twisted everything else? Another slam rattled the door. The metal lock groaned under the force. Dust showered down from the frame. The doubles took a synchronized step forward. Just one, but it was enough to make Elise cry out, backing into the counter. Their mouths stretched open, black smoke spilling from within, curling through the RV like tendrils. And then the voice outside boomed louder. "Don't let them touch you." For the first time, I believed it might not be the hollow. But how could I know? I gripped the counter, my hand trembling so hard the knife I dropped earlier rattled against the floor. My reflection's hand twitched in perfect mimicry, the knife in its palm scraping against the linoleum. The sound scraped straight through my skull. "Daniel," Elise hissed, "if you open that door, it might not stop. Whatever's outside might be worse." She was right, and she was wrong. Because if we stayed, we wouldn't have a choice much longer. The pounding shifted. It wasn't just fists now, it was claws, dragging down the door, nails screeching against the metal. A sound like bone grinding against bone. Marin buried her face in my chest, muffling a sob. But then, muffled in her cry, I heard it. Another whisper. You promised you'd keep me safe. It wasn't her. It was the RV itself, the walls murmuring with her voice, twisting it into something cruel. Shut up! I roared at the wood, the walls, the doubles, at everything. My own voice cracked, echoing too loud in the tiny space. The doubles froze again, their mouths snapping shut, the black smoke retreating for a heartbeat. The glow flickered, the pounding outside stopped. Silence. My chest heaved, sweat dripping down my spine. Elise's nails dug deeper into my arm. For one breath, one fragile moment, it seemed like it was over. Then came the whisper, not from the walls, not from the doubles, from directly behind the door. Daniel. My name, spoken in my father's voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. The sound hollowed me out. My father had been dead nearly a decade, buried in a town 2 states away. I'd lowered the casket myself. But now his voice slid through the crack around the door like smoke. Open the door. Elise sobbed, shaking her head, whispering, It knows you. It knows everything about us. The doubles began to laugh. Not loud, not manic. Soft chuckles, perfectly timed, all 3 in harmony. My own laughter, Elise's laughter, Marin's childish giggle, weaving together into something that curdled the air. The RV felt smaller, the walls closing in, the ceiling pressing lower. The glow from the back pulsed brighter, almost liquid now, pooling on the carpet. My double raised its knife and pointed it at my chest. Elise whispered in my ear, frantic, If you open it, we're dead. If you don't open it, we're dead. What do we do? The voice outside answered for me. You don't get to choose. The lock snapped with a deafening crack. The door didn't swing open. It buckled inward as though something had rammed it. Metal shrieked. The hinges tore. I threw myself between it and my family, raising my arms, ready to fight, though I had nothing left to fight with. The doubles surged forward at the same moment. For a heartbeat, the 2 forces collided. Light from the back, shadow from the front, crashing together in the center of the RV like a storm. The air itself screamed, a sound so loud it shattered the kitchen clock, sent shards of glass raining across the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Elise clutched Marin, both of them screaming, their voices swallowed by the roar. Then, darkness. The light vanished, the doubles were gone. The pounding ceased. And standing in the doorway, framed by the night, was a man. Or something wearing the shape of one. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of a weathered hat. His coat was tattered, dripping mud. His boots left wet prints across the carpet, though outside the ground was dry. He looked at me with eyes that burned faintly, not like fire but like coals. Dull, smoldering, eternal. And he smiled. You shouldn't have come here, he said. He stood framed in the doorway, a smear of mud dripping from the brim of his hat, each drop landing heavy on the ruined carpet. Elise pressed Marin against her chest, shielding her eyes, though I knew there was no way to shield her from this. I stepped forward, my body shaking, but my voice sharp. Who are you? His smile didn't fade. Names don't mean much in Ashwood Hollow. They're taken, stripped, worn down like bark. What I am, that's what matters. His voice was gravel and earth, deep as the fissure we'd seen under the totem. You've felt them already, haven't you? He tilted his head toward the rear of the RV, where the glow still pulsed faintly in the hallway. The echoes, the ones who stayed. My throat tightened. Are doubles. Not doubles, remnants. The hollow feeds on what you bring with you, the parts you don't protect. Memories, voices, faces. It hollows you out until only the shell is left, and shells don't wander far. Elise's voice cracked, raw and furious. What do you want from us? The man stepped fully inside, the RV groaning under his weight. His eyes burned brighter now, and I caught a glimpse of his skin beneath the coat, ashen, cracked like old timber, faintly glowing at the seams. I want nothing, he said simply. The hollow wants everything, and it always gets it in time. He stopped in front of me, his boots inches from mine, but sometimes it lets one go. Not because it's merciful, because it knows fear tastes richer when carried back into the world. It spreads, Daniel. That's how the hollow survives, one story at a time. Hearing my name in his mouth made me sick. You came here to find silence, he continued, voice low, to give your family peace, but you brought them to its doorstep, and now you'll never live without the weight of it pressing on you, even if you leave. Elise stepped forward, her fear burned into rage. We don't want its story. We just want to leave. For the first time, his smile faltered. His eyes softened, just slightly. Everyone says that. He turned his gaze to Marin, and my stomach dropped. Even the children. I moved instinctively, blocking his view. Don't look at her. He chuckled, a sound that seemed to shake the walls. Protective. Good. That might be the only reason the hollow spares you tonight. The RV creaked, the walls groaning as if something massive had leaned against them from the outside. The glow in the hallway dimmed, then sputtered, leaving the rear of the RV dark again. The carved faces I'd seen on the totem flashed in my mind. Mine among them. Elise's. Marin's. The man leaned closer, his breath damp and cold against my face. Remember this, Daniel. When you smell the earth where it shouldn't be, when you hear laughter in the trees at night, when you see your own face staring back from dark glass, that's the hollow, reminding you it hasn't forgotten. He stepped back toward the door. You wanted silence. You'll have it, but silence is never empty. It's filled with what you fear most. With that, he ducked out into the night. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click, and the RV was still. Elise was crying silently, clutching Marin, rocking her as if to remind herself she was real. I sank to the floor, my knees giving out, my chest heaving with sobs I hadn't allowed myself in years. For a long time, none of us moved. Then I tried the key again. The engine roared to life. We drove without speaking, headlights cutting through the black, the road stretching endless and empty. I didn't know if hours passed or minutes. All I knew was that the forest eventually thinned, and the sign we'd passed on the way in appeared again at the roadside. Ashwood Hollow, campground closed. The letters looked rusted, eaten by weather. Moss hung over the wood, but there was something new carved into it. 3 faces, gouged deep. Mine, Elise's, Marin's. Elise saw it too. Her hands slipped into mine, her grip tight enough to hurt. Neither of us spoke. We drove until the sun rose. Even then, the light didn't ease the weight in my chest. Every mile between us and that place felt false, like the road was stretching itself only to keep us moving in circles. We finally pulled into a small-town diner, the kind where the smell of coffee greets you before the door fully opens. We sat in a booth, ordered nothing, just clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. The waitress asked where we were coming from. I opened my mouth, but Elise's hand squeezed mine under the table, stopping me. We were just passing through, she said, because that was the truth we had to live with. We couldn't tell anyone. We couldn't give it voice. The hollow wanted its story to spread, to be remembered, to be feared, and now it was inside us, whether we spoke it or not. That night, parked at a different campground under a safe, open sky, Marin woke screaming. She said someone was knocking on the RV door. But when I checked, no one was there, only silence. And in the silence, faint and steady, I heard it. Leave. I shut the blinds and crawled back into bed beside them, holding my family as tightly as I could. I told myself it was just memory, just fear, nothing more. But deep down, I knew the truth. Ashwood Hollow never lets you leave. It just waits until you bring it back with you. Weeks passed, though time didn't feel steady anymore. Every day bled into the next. Colors muted, sounds muffled, as if I were living with cotton stuffed in my ears and fog behind my eyes. We didn't go back to Ashwood Hollow. Of course we didn't, but we carried it with us anyway. The first sign was Marin. She stopped laughing the way she used to. Before, her giggles were wild, unstoppable, little bursts of joy that could fill a room. Now, when she laughed, it was short, sharp, almost nervous, like she wasn't sure it belonged to her. Sometimes she'd stop halfway through, covering her mouth as if the sound didn't feel right coming out. One night, I woke to find her standing at the RV's window, staring out into the trees. "What do you see?" I whispered, not wanting to scare her. She didn't turn her head. Her voice was calm. "They're out there, but they're not coming in. Not yet." I didn't ask who she meant. I already knew. Elise tried to be strong, but I saw the cracks forming in her too. She started sleeping with the lights on. She jumped at small noises, the crack of branches outside, the groan of the RV settling on its axles. She refused to let Marin out of her sight, not even to play at the campground playgrounds. Once, she pulled her back so hard from a swing I thought she'd dislocate her shoulder. I wanted to tell her to relax, that we were safe now. But I couldn't, because I didn't believe it. And then there was me. I saw my face in reflections where it shouldn't be, in darkened windows, in the sheen of the stovetop, in puddles after rain. Not just my reflection, my double. Hollow-eyed, grinning. Sometimes it moved before I did, lips twitching into words I couldn't hear. I stopped shaving because I couldn't stand looking into mirrors. I stopped driving at night because the headlights would catch shapes in the trees, figures watching, waiting, always waiting. But the worst was the knocking. It didn't come every night. Sometimes weeks would pass, but it always returned. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. At the RV door, I'd creep forward, knife in hand, heart pounding, and when I opened it, nothing would be there. Nothing but silence. And the silence was worse, because in that silence I'd hear my father's voice again, just faint enough to doubt, just clear enough to believe. "Open up, Daniel, before it's too late." I never opened. Not again. We tried to keep moving, thinking maybe distance would weaken whatever tether Ashwood Hollow had thrown around us. We drove west to Colorado, south to Arizona, north to Montana. The miles piled on. But it didn't matter. The hollow followed. Not in roads or signs, but in the weight pressing on our chests at night, in the faces carved into my dreams, in the whispers between the rustling leaves. Ashwood Hollow wasn't a place you could leave behind. It was a seed, and once you saw it, once it sank its roots into you, it grew. I realized the man in the hat had been right. The hollow didn't need to keep us there. It wanted us to carry it, to spread it, to tell its story. But I refuse. I'm not telling you this because I want to spread it. I'm telling you because I need someone to understand what silence really is. Silence isn't peace. Silence isn't rest. Silence is where the hollow waits. Every time you camp in the woods, every time you park your RV under trees that have stood longer than memory, silence gathers around you. And if you listen closely, if you listen too long, you'll hear it. The faintest voice, leave. And maybe you'll laugh it off. Call it the wind, a trick of your ears. That's what I did. But when the knocking comes, when you hear your own voice in the dark or see your own face looking back at you from the window, you'll know. The hollow has found you too. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter how far you've run. It waits. It always waits. And when you're tired enough, when your guard slips, when you're ready to trade the noise of your life for the promise of stillness, you'll step through the door and you'll stay. Because that's the truth of Ashwood Hollow. No one really leaves. We just carry it forward, one family at a time, until the silence has spread far enough to swallow everything. I hold my daughter close every night. I remind myself she's still here, still warm, still mine. I tell myself that as long as I keep her in my arms, the hollow can't take her. But sometimes when she sleeps, she whispers, not in dreams, not nonsense, words. Clear, cold words. "They're waiting, Daddy." I lie awake beside her, staring into the dark, listening for the knock that always comes sooner or later, and I pray it isn't tonight. But deep down, I know praying doesn't matter. The hollow doesn't need faith. It only needs silence, and silence always comes. I'll never forget the first time I pulled my RV into Alaska. My name is Daniel Morgan, 42 years old, raised in Montana, but forever drawn north. I thought I understood wilderness. The Rocky Mountains had taught me to respect silence, weather, and the weight of a storm rolling over ridgelines. But Alaska is different. Out here, the silence doesn't comfort you. It confronts you. It feels as though the land itself waits, watching to see if you belong, if you'll respect its boundaries, or if it will swallow you whole. I was traveling alone that summer, chasing a dream I had nurtured for years, to experience the remote RV parks scattered across the Alaskan interior, the places that never make it onto glossy travel brochures. I wanted to write about the real side of RV living in the last frontier, the hidden corners where the air smells of spruce and moss, where the daylight lingers too long, and where human presence feels like an intrusion. My first stop was a park just outside of Tok. It didn't have a name, at least not one painted on a sign. A gravel turnoff from the highway led me into a clearing cut from dense birch and spruce. A few old trailers sat scattered in the trees like forgotten relics, and at the far end, a hand-painted board read simply, "Camp, $10. Honor box." That was Alaska for you. Honesty still had currency out here. I parked beneath a line of black spruce that leaned like tired sentinels, their trunks darkened by years of rain. The ground was soft, spongy, like walking on soaked carpet. As I leveled the RV, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to lean not at random, but toward the same point, as if gravity had bent them all toward something hidden deeper in the forest. At first, I chalked it up to wind patterns, permafrost heave. Alaska's ground shifts in ways you don't see down south. Still, that detail sat in the back of my mind. By nightfall, the sky refused to darken completely. Midnight sun hung like a ghost of daylight. A pale orange glow stretched thin across the horizon. My body, desperate for real darkness, ached for rest. I pulled the curtains closed tight, cooked myself a simple meal, and settled in for what I thought would be a quiet night. But quiet in Alaska is never really quiet. I woke around 2 a.m. to a sound that made me freeze. It wasn't wind, it wasn't animal movement. It was tapping. Slow, deliberate, knuckle-on-wood tapping. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, and strained my ears. At first, I thought it came from the RV's frame, like something brushing against the metal siding. Then it shifted to the roof. 3 distinct taps, a pause, then 3 more. I wanted to believe it was branches, loose pine cones, anything that fit the ordinary, but the trees around me weren't tall enough to reach the roof, and there hadn't been a whisper of wind all night. The tapping came again, steady, patient, almost testing. My throat dried. Instinct told me not to move, not to give myself away. I lay there in the stale warmth of the RV, sweat beating on my temples, until eventually the sound stopped. Hours passed before dawn finally seeped through the curtains. When I stepped outside, the roof was clean. No pine cones, no fallen branches, just dew clinging to the aluminum like cold sweat. I should have left then. But that's the thing about being out here alone, you argue with yourself. You don't want to appear weak, even to your own mind. I convinced myself it had been nothing, a trick of exhaustion. So I stayed. The second night, the unease grew worse. I kept the windows cracked for air, but that only let in the smell of damp earth, a smell so thick it felt alive. Again, around 2 a.m., the sound came, this time not tapping, but dragging. Something coarse sliding across the length of the RV. Metal groaned faintly under pressure. I shot upright, clutching the flashlight I kept beside the bed, my knuckles white around its handle. "Moose," I whispered to myself. Maybe a bear. Saying the words out loud didn't make them real, but I needed them to be. I didn't dare look out the window. Instead, I sat frozen, every nerve screaming, until the dragging stopped. At sunrise, I finally forced myself out, scanning the ground around the RV. No prints, no disturbed soil, just the strange tilt of the trees, all leaning toward the same invisible center. And then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The honor box. The wooden payment box, nailed to a post at the park entrance, was gone. Not broken, not vandalized. Gone. The post stood bare, fresh wood where nails had been wrenched out. I hadn't heard a car all night, no engines, no footsteps. Yet someone, or something, had taken it. By the third night, sleep was impossible. My nerves were shot. I left every interior light blazing, locked the door twice, and sat at the tiny dinette with my flashlight and a hunting knife laid on the table. The air felt heavy, like it carried weight, pressing against the RV's thin walls. Outside, the forest seemed too still. Even the mosquitoes had vanished. And then it started, not tapping, not dragging, whispering. At first it was faint, like the hush of wind brushing the trees, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Tones, rhythms, almost words. Male voices, low and layered, like a crowd murmuring in another room. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would split my ribs. The whispering moved around the RV, circling, slipping from one side to the other, never quite close enough to decipher, but always there, just beyond reach. I gripped the knife, though I knew steel wouldn't matter against voices in the dark. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I wanted to run, to slam the ignition and tear out onto the gravel road, but some force rooted me there. Not fear, something deeper, heavier, like the forest itself pressing me down. And then, as suddenly as it began, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was worse. When dawn came, I was still sitting at that table, knife in hand, lights buzzing overhead. The forest looked the same as it always had, wet, green, endless, but I knew better now. Something lived there, something that didn't want me. I didn't pack up carefully. I didn't eat breakfast. I turned the key, floored the pedal, and drove until the spruce gave way to open road. I told myself I'd never stop at a nameless park again, but Alaska has a way of testing promises like that, because that was only the beginning. I drove west, the gravel dust still clinging to the undercarriage of my RV, as if the place refused to let go of me. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went. Even when the road smoothed out into asphalt again, I couldn't unclench. The silence of the cab pressed harder than the voices had the night before. I replayed every sound in my head, tap, drag, whisper, until I convinced myself I might have dreamed it all. Maybe exhaustion, maybe nerves. But when I checked the rearview mirror and saw those leaning trees shrinking behind me, my gut told me the nightmare wasn't finished. By late afternoon, the sun slid low on the horizon, though in Alaska, that never really meant darkness, just long, endless twilight that paints everything in shades of copper and shadow. I pulled into another RV park. This one at least had a name painted on a weathered board, Caribou Crossing. A half-dozen rigs were scattered across a wide gravel lot. A couple sat outside their fifth wheel sipping beer, waving as I rolled past. Kids rode bikes between the campers, their laughter ringing sharp in the still air. For a moment, I felt relief, civilization, or something like it. But relief can trick you. It can lower your guard at the exact moment it shouldn't. I picked a spot near the back, far enough for privacy, but close enough that I could see other campers. I wanted proof I wasn't alone, not this time. The air smelled faintly of diesel mixed with wood smoke from a distant fire pit. Familiar smells. Safe smells. I convinced myself tonight would be better. Still, as evening deepened, a nervous pulse thrummed under my skin. I struck up a brief conversation with the couple who'd waved earlier. Tom and Marcy, both in their 50s, from Oregon. They'd been coming to Alaska summers for nearly a decade, chasing salmon runs in the clean kind of quiet you couldn't find back home. I wanted to ask them if they'd ever heard strange tapping or voices in the woods, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to sound like a paranoid newcomer, so I kept my fears to myself, forcing a smile as we parted. Back in the RV, I cooked dinner, kept the windows cracked for fresh air, and sat with a notebook in my lap, jotting down details for the article I thought I might one day write. But the more I wrote, the more it felt like I was recording evidence, not travel notes. And when the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched across the lot, I couldn't keep my eyes from flicking to the tree line. That was when I noticed something off. Every other RV in the park had a porch light burning, yellow halos casting circles on the gravel, except mine. I checked twice, flicking the switch by the door. Nothing. Dead. The bulb wasn't burned out. I'd replaced it before the trip. The breaker hadn't tripped either. Still, no light. My stomach knotted. I locked the door early that night, double-checked every latch, and sat by the window with my flashlight ready. Around midnight, the park had gone quiet. The kids were long in bed, the fires doused, only the distant hum of a generator somewhere in the dark. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was Tom, maybe stepping out to check something on his rig. A man-shaped shadow moved slowly between the RVs, back bent slightly, deliberate in every step. But when the figure reached the gravel lane, it didn't turn toward any of the other campers. It turned toward me. The beam of a neighboring porch light caught his face just long enough. Pale, sunken eyes, lips moving as though muttering. And then he slipped back into shadow, walking straight toward my rig. I froze. My hand hovered over the flashlight, but I didn't want to give away my position. He came close enough that I heard gravel crunch under his boots, close enough that my chest burned from holding my breath. Then he stopped, right outside my door. Silence. And then 3 taps. I nearly dropped the flashlight, the same rhythm as the first night. 3 deliberate knuckle raps against the door. My body wanted to scream, but instinct kept me pinned. Whoever or whatever stood there, I knew not to respond. Not yet. I sat unmoving, heart clawing at my ribs, until finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the figure turned and drifted back into the shadows. When dawn arrived, I stumbled outside, scanning for footprints. The gravel was too disturbed to tell. No one else in the park stirred. Tom and Marcy's rig sat quiet, blinds drawn. The kids' bikes leaned against their camper as though nothing had happened. I wanted to ask, had anyone else seen the man? But my tongue felt heavy. What if it was just me? What if the others would laugh, or worse, look at me with pity? So I said nothing, packed my things, and pulled out onto the road again. But Alaska doesn't let you escape so easily. Over the next week, I kept moving, never staying more than one night at any park. From Glen Allen to Valdez, from the Copper River Basin to the shadow of Rangel St. Elias, every place carried the same unease. Sometimes it was a broken light, sometimes a sound, dragging, tapping, voices. Sometimes it was simply the way people looked at me. Blank, like they knew something I didn't, like they were waiting for me to realize it on my own. One night in Valdez, parked by the water's edge, I woke to the smell of rot. Not fish, though the harbor reeked of it by day. This was deeper, sourer, like soil dug up from a grave. The stench filled the RV, clung to the sheets, burned the back of my throat. I stumbled outside, gagging, but the air was clean, crisp with salt and pine. The smell existed only inside my rig. I scrubbed every surface, sprayed cleaner until my eyes watered. By morning, the stench had vanished, but I couldn't shake the thought that it had come from me, that something had carried it in on my skin. That was when I realized whatever haunted me since that nameless park outside talk wasn't bound to a place. It had followed me. And worse, it was growing bolder. I stopped pretending I could ignore it. Every mile deeper into Alaska, every park I pulled into, the presence pressed harder, closer. It was no longer just the environment whispering suspicion. It was inside me. The next stop was a park near Glen Ellen, tucked into a valley where the spruce rose like spires and the mountains loomed purple in the distance. On paper, it should have been paradise. Remote but maintained, a stream running right beside the gravel pads, fire rings set out neatly. A handful of rigs dotted the lot, travelers like me seeking rest after hours on the road. I told myself I would talk to someone this time, share what I'd been experiencing. Maybe hearing another voice confirm or deny, it would ground me. A young man set up camp 2 spaces down, pulling in with a dented pickup and a weather-stained camper shell. He introduced himself as Mark, 28, from Anchorage, out fishing for grayling. He smiled easily, offered me a beer, and I felt a flicker of normalcy. We sat by his fire, the flames snapping against the cool night, trading road stories. For the first time in days, I laughed. But then Mark leaned in, lowering his voice. "You ever hear them?" he asked. The way he said it, flat, without explanation, froze my blood. I forced myself to ask, "Hear who?" He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the dim sky. "The ones who come tapping. First night it's the door, next the roof. After that, they whisper. If you answer, they don't leave." I stared at him, every hair on my body rising. My chest tightened. "You're joking," I managed, but Mark didn't smile. "Do I look like I'm joking?" His eyes caught the firelight, dark and serious. Don't answer them, no matter how much they sound like somebody you know. My stomach twisted. He knew. He had experienced the same pattern. Yet his calm delivery made it worse, as if he had resigned himself to it. We sat in silence after that, the only sounds the stream gurgling behind us and the occasional pop of sap in the fire. When I finally excused myself and stepped back into my RV, the air inside felt tighter, suffocating, as if something had been waiting for me. I locked the door, shut the blinds, and sat on the edge of the bed with the knife across my knees. Midnight came. Then 1 a.m., the park was silent. I almost believed I might make it through untouched. Then the sound began. 3 taps. This time, not on the door. On the window right beside me. I flinched, every muscle seizing, but I didn't move. Breath burned in my lungs. Another 3 taps, lighter, testing the glass. Then silence. And then my mother's voice. "Danny," it whispered. I nearly dropped the knife. My mother had been dead for 6 years. She'd never been to Alaska. Yet the voice was hers. Same soft timbre, same way she used to call me in for dinner as a boy. My throat closed. My instincts screamed at me to reply, to shout back, to deny it. But Mark's warning anchored me. Don't answer them, no matter how much they sound like somebody you know. So I sat in silence, shaking, tears stinging my eyes, while my dead mother whispered my name outside my window. The voice shifted, lower, male, familiar. It was my own voice. "Danny, open up." The words came in my cadence, my tone, as though I stood outside talking to myself. My heart thrashed against my ribs, desperate to escape. I pressed both hands over my mouth, biting my tongue to keep from answering. The whispers went on for hours, changing voices, tones, cadences. Friends long gone, relatives buried, even old coworkers I hadn't thought about in years. They circled the RV, tapping sometimes, dragging something across the siding. By dawn, my body ached from tension, my knuckles bloodless around the knife handle. When I finally staggered outside into the thin gray light, I saw Mark's campsite. The fire had burned to ash. His truck was gone, no tracks in the gravel. It was as if he'd never been there at all. I staggered through the lot, asking the other campers if they'd seen him. Blank stares. Confusion. No one had noticed a young man in a dented pickup. No one had shared a beer with him. I wanted to believe he'd just left early, but that the silence in their eyes told me otherwise. That day, I drove for hours, trying to outrun what had followed me. But everywhere I stopped, it was there. The lights flickering, the smell of rot, the weight in the air pressing harder. By the time I reached Fairbanks, I was half convinced I was losing my mind. I pulled into a larger park on the outskirts of town, determined to force myself among people, real people, to anchor my sanity. Families barbecued, kids ran screaming, the smell of burgers and charcoal thick in the air. Normal, real. But that night, as I lay in my RV with laughter still echoing faintly from another rig, I heard it again. 3 taps, this time from inside. I bolted upright, knife in hand, and scanned the RV. Nothing moved. But the sound had been clear, knuckles on wood from the cabinet by the bed. My stomach dropped. Something wasn't outside anymore. It was with me. I opened the cabinet slowly, hand shaking, knife ready. Empty. Just folded blankets and a box of matches. But when I closed the door, there were 3 fresh impressions on the wood. Knuckle marks pressed into the grain, as if someone had rapped on it from the inside. I sat awake until dawn again, hollowed out, my mind a taut wire ready to snap. And for the first time I thought, maybe this isn't about the parks. Maybe it's about me. I couldn't stay in Fairbanks. Not after the tapping came from inside. I drove north the next morning, gripping the wheel so hard my wrists cramped. The sky stretched wide and blue, the kind of crisp Alaskan day people dream of, but all I felt was dread pressing down like a storm that never broke. The farther I went, the emptier the road became. Towns gave way to scattered gas stations, then to nothing but forest and mountains. I kept telling myself the presence wouldn't follow me past the last outpost of civilization. That maybe if I drove far enough into the blank, I'd outrun it. But deep down, I knew it was already inside the RV. By dusk, I pulled into a park outside of Coldfoot. Only 3 other rigs sat scattered across the lot, dwarfed by endless black spruce and the looming Brooks Range. The air was colder here, the wind sharper, carrying a bite of snow even in summer. I chose a site near the tree line, stupidly thinking the isolation might help me breathe easier. But the silence that fell over the lot after nightfall was suffocating. No kids, no fires, no music, just the occasional groan of the permafrost shifting beneath the gravel. I cooked nothing, ate nothing, just sat at the dinette with my knife laid out like a religious talisman. The first tap came at 11, not 3 taps this time. 1, slow, heavy, right against the door. I froze, lungs locked tight. Then came another, harder, rattling the latch. My skin prickled cold. Whoever was outside wanted me to know they weren't pretending anymore. I stood, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, and inched toward the door. Every instinct screamed not to open it, but the pounding escalated. 2 more hits, then 3, shaking the thin metal skin of the RV. The entire frame groaned. And then silence. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear. That was when the whisper slid through the thin gap in the seal, so close it tickled my eardrum. "Danny? Let us in." The words came in unison. Not one voice. Many. Dozens. Male, female, young, old. All layered, all insistent. I staggered back, knees buckling, that knife clattering to the floor. My chest seized, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the trembling door. My own reflection in the narrow window stared back at me, pale and terrified, as the voices kept calling over and over, twisting in rhythm, a chant that shook me down to the marrow. And then, I swear to God, I saw the handle move. The latch jerked once, twice, like someone testing it. Then it stopped. I scrambled to the back, every light blazing, heart punching against my ribs. I wanted to run, to slam the ignition and drive until the tank ran dry, but my legs wouldn't move. Fear rooted me in place. The whispers circled the RV again, brushing against the windows, pressing on the thin aluminum walls, sliding beneath the floor. And then, suddenly, they shifted inside. I heard them behind me. Spinning, I saw nothing, just shadows stretched thin across the lit interior. But the whispers were here now. Close, weaving around me, filling the air like smoke. I staggered back against the counter, covering my ears, but it didn't help. Then one voice cut through the others. Clear, familiar, my father's. "Son!" I gasped, throat raw. My father had died in a car wreck when I was 19. I hadn't heard his voice in over 2 decades, but here it was, warm, low, certain. "Open the door, son. You'll be safe with me." Tears blurred my eyes. My father had been my anchor, the man who taught me to camp, to trust the woods, to drive through storms without flinching. Hearing him again nearly broke me. My hand hovered over the door latch, shaking. Every instinct screamed to obey, to fling it open, to collapse into his arms. But deep down, I knew. My father wasn't outside. I slammed both hands over my ears and screamed, a ragged, primal sound, refusing to listen, refusing to answer. The voices surged, angry now, battering the walls, rattling the cabinets, a hurricane of whispers collapsing around me. Lights flickered, shadows warped, the entire RV groaned as though it would split apart. And then, darkness. Every bulb went out at once. The din of whispers cut short, silence collapsed heavy around me. I sat in the pitch black, panting, trembling, knife clutched tight. For long minutes, hours maybe, nothing happened. Only the sound of my breath filled the void. When dawn finally seeped gray and thin through the curtains, I was still on the floor, my body wrecked, my mind splintered. I stumbled outside, expecting to see other campers, some trace of life in the lot, but the rigs were gone, every one of them. The gravel pad stood empty, tire tracks erased, as if I had been the only one here all along. My stomach twisted cold. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the endless spruce just stood silent, leaning, watching. That was when I realized I wasn't escaping this. Whatever had followed me since Tuck wasn't haunting the parks. It was stripping away my reality, piece by piece, until only it and I remained. I didn't remember leaving Coldfoot. I only remember the wheel shaking beneath my hands, the Brooks Range a blur in the windshield, gravel spitting under the tires as if the earth itself tried to drag me back. My eyes burned from sleeplessness, my throat raw from screaming into the dark. I told myself I'd head south, maybe all the way back to the border, but the truth was I drove blindly, chasing distance I could never measure. Hours passed, or maybe days. Out here, time folds on itself. The sun dips, but twilight lingers, never quite letting the world breathe in full night or day. I caught myself pulling into another RV park before I even realized I'd turned off the road. This one looked abandoned. No office, no campers, no honor box, just a gravel clearing hemmed by pines, with old fire rings rusting like scars in the ground. The air carried a metallic tang, sharp and biting, as though lightning had struck nearby. Something in me screamed not to stop, but my body was too tired to keep going. I shut off the engine and sat in silence, listening to the tick of the cooling metal. My reflection in the window looked gaunt, eyes sunken, beard scruff patchy and uneven. I barely recognized myself. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no wind, no mosquitoes, just a stillness so deep it felt like being underwater. I told myself I'd only rest a few hours, then move on. But exhaustion pinned me down. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking. 3 taps. This time they came from beneath me, from the floor. I jolted upright, knife in hand, sweat freezing on my skin. The taps came again, slow, deliberate, from under the RV's frame, right beneath where I slept. My legs went numb, my breath shallow. I forced myself to whisper, "It's nothing. Just the metal cooling." Just another 3 taps cut me off. Louder. Sharper. Then a drag. Long and rough, scraping along the undercarriage, rocking the whole vehicle. My stomach heaved. Something was down there. I stumbled to the door, half ready to run into the night, but froze with my hand on the latch. If I opened it, I'd be giving them exactly what they wanted. I pressed my forehead to the thin metal, shaking, whispering prayers I hadn't said since I was a boy. That was when the voices came again, not outside this time, not around me, from beneath, rising up through the floor, seeping into the air, curling in my ears. "Danny, we're waiting." I staggered back, heart a hammer inside a cracked chest. The voices weren't whispers anymore. They were clear, sharp, echoing like they'd climbed inside the bones of the RV. My name twisted, stretched, called in chorus. Then the floor shuddered. I watched in horror as 3 knuckle-shaped bulges pressed up from the plywood by my feet, indenting the linoleum. Once, twice, then again, as if someone knocked from below, eager to crawl through. I lost it then. Panic ripped through me like wildfire. I bolted to the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition, and floored it. Gravel spat in all directions as I tore out of that clearing, bouncing over ruts, branches snapping against the sides. My teeth rattled, my hands shook, but I didn't stop. Not until I hit the highway again, headlights carving tunnels into the endless dusk. Even then, I kept hearing it, the faint knocking, not outside, not below, but inside the RV. Somewhere behind me, in the cabinets, the walls, the hollow spaces I could never check all at once. Every mile, it grew louder. I started driving through nights, refusing to stop, my vision blurred, eyes raw, hands blistered on the wheel. But no matter how far I went, the presence stayed, tapping, dragging, whispering, always just close enough to remind me I wasn't alone. And then came the laughter. The first time, it slipped through the radio, soft and faint beneath the static, though the dial was turned off. Children laughing, high, sharp, echoing. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, but the sound didn't fade. It only grew, circling me, rising until it filled the whole cab. I screamed at it, cursed it, begged it to stop, but it only twined tighter, pulling at the edges of my mind. By the time I reached the Yukon River, I was a shell. My reflection in the side mirror looked wrong. Eyes too dark, mouth twitching at the corners like it belonged to someone else. My own voice no longer sounded like mine. Every word I spoke cracked, strained, a stranger's voice wearing my throat. At the bridge, I pulled over, staggering out into the cold air. The river thundered below, wide and endless, the current swallowing entire trees as if they were matchsticks. I thought about jumping, about letting the water carry me where the voices couldn't follow. But when I looked down into that churning black, I saw faces, dozens of them. Pale, distorted, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams, they stared up at me through the reflection of the sky, mouths moving in unison, forming my name. I stumbled back, gasping, legs trembling so hard I nearly collapsed. The wind cut sharp across my face, carrying with it a smell. Rot, damp, the same stench that had invaded my RV in Valdez, only now it clung to me. My skin, my clothes, my breath. I knew then there was no outrunning this. It wasn't the parks, it wasn't Alaska, it was me. And they weren't trying to haunt me anymore. They were trying to claim me. I kept driving north, though every instinct screamed to turn around. The road narrowed, trees closing in on both sides, the Brooks Range rising jagged against the horizon like the broken teeth of some ancient beast. My body was wrecked, hands trembling, eyes burning, muscles knotted with tension. But something deeper than exhaustion pushed me forward. A compulsion, like I wasn't behind the wheel anymore, but being carried towards something that had already chosen me. By the time I reached Dead Horse, the world felt alien. A skeleton town on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, half swallowed by permafrost and oil machinery. The wind there is constant, a hollow sound that moans through pipes and steel frames until you can't tell if it's weather or voices. I parked in a lot scraped bare of snow, my RV dwarfed by tanker trucks and rusting drills. No camp office, no hookups, no fellow travelers, just empty space that felt watched from every direction. I sat behind the wheel long after the engine died, staring through the windshield at nothing. My mind felt peeled raw, sleep-deprived, yes, but more than that, eroded, like something had been sandblasting my sanity mile by mile. I tried to remind myself who I was, my name, my age, my story. Daniel Morgan, 42, Montana-born, here to see Alaska. But each repetition felt thinner, less certain, until the words were nothing but paper masks slipping from my mouth. The tapping began again, not 3 this time, 1, slow, so heavy it rattled the dishes in the cabinets. Then another, louder, then another, shaking the frame. I lurched from the seat, knife in hand, but the sound didn't come from the door or windows, it came from the roof. Heavy steps pacing across the aluminum, heel to toe, deliberate, measured. My heart stuttered. Something was walking on top of the RV. The ceiling creaked, dust sifted down. The footsteps circled once, twice, then stopped directly above me. I stood frozen, breath loud in the silence. Then came a voice. My own. Danny. It came through the roof, perfectly mimicking my cadence. Danny, look up. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then the ceiling bowed inward. A handprint pressed down through the thin aluminum, 5 fingers splaying, knuckles stretching the metal like wet paper. Another handprint joined it, then a face. The outline pushed through, featureless but unmistakably human. Its mouth opened wide, wider than bone should allow, until the aluminum groaned. I screamed and bolted for the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, but before I could shift into gear, every light inside flickered and died. The dashboard went black, the RV shuddered, frozen, as if unseen hands clamped down on every wheel. And then the voices poured in, not whispers anymore, shouts. Thousands of them, male, female, children, elderly. They roared in unison, filling every inch of space, rattling the glass, shoving against my eardrums until I thought my skull would split. My own voice wove among them, laughing, sobbing, screaming. Let us in. The words boomed from every wall, every vent, every crack. I dropped the knife, clutching my ears, falling to my knees. The floor vibrated beneath me as though something massive clawed at the undercarriage, trying to rip its way through. The walls buckled inward. Cabinet doors flew open, plates shattered, curtains shredded as if torn by invisible claws. My name hammered against me from every angle, Danny, 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 until I thought I'd dissolve into the sound. In desperation, I crawled to the back, shoved open the emergency window, and threw myself into the cold. The gravel bit into my palms as I hit the ground. Wind slashed my face. I stumbled to my feet, looking back. The RV was alive, its frame warped, panels bowing outward, shadows crawling beneath the skin. The roof bulged as if something pressed against it from inside, something too large to be contained. The windows lit from within, not with electricity, but with a dull, pulsing glow, like embers breathing. And the voices didn't stop. They poured out into the night, a hurricane of sound that shook the trucks and towers of the empty lot. My knees buckled. I fell to the gravel, pressing my forehead to the frozen ground, begging it all to stop. The glow from the RV flared bright white. For an instant, I thought it would burst, shatter into pieces, and release whatever had clawed its way in. But then it all stopped. The light died. The voices cut off. The air went still. I lifted my head slowly. The RV sat dark and silent as if nothing had happened. Not a dent in its frame, not a crack in its windows. Just the same battered vehicle I'd driven from Montana, waiting patiently in the lot. But I knew. It wasn't the same anymore. I stumbled closer, every nerve raw. My reflection in the window stopped me cold. It wasn't mine. The man staring back had my face, but wrong. Eyes too deep, skin too pale, mouth curled in a smile I hadn't made. He raised his hand when I did, but the timing was off, delayed, like he was pretending, learning how to mimic me. And then his lips moved. Inside. My body locked. My breath froze in my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over the gravel, heart shrieking against my ribs. The reflection smiled wider. I turned and ran into the darkness, not knowing where, not caring, just away. But Alaska has no edges. Out here, the wilderness stretches forever. And no matter how far you run, the voices always know your name. I ran until my lungs tore at the icy air, until my legs threatened to buckle beneath me. The gravel road that led into Dead Horse stretched endless, lit only by the faint smear of twilight that never fully left the Alaskan sky. My boots slipped on patches of permafrost, stones slicing my palms as I caught myself again and again. But I didn't stop. The image of that reflection, smiling wrong, whispering inside, burned into me like a brand. I don't know how far I made it before I collapsed in the ditch. The wind hissed over the tundra, carrying no sound of pursuit, but my ears rang with echoes. My name, Danny, drawled in 1,000 voices that lived inside my skull now, no longer needing to circle the RV. I tried to calm my breathing, force logic into the panic. Maybe I was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation, isolation, nerves frayed raw by miles of solitude. But when I pressed my hands to the frozen dirt, it pulsed. Once. Twice. Like something alive beneath the permafrost was breathing. I staggered to my feet, scanning the horizon. Oil rigs loomed in the distance like skeletal towers, their lights flickering against the low clouds. Civilization, or what passed for it here, was close. If I could just reach people, real people, maybe I could hold on. I forced myself toward the glow, each step a battle against the tremor in my legs. The gravel crunched too loud underfoot, every sound magnified in the dead silence. I kept glancing back, but the road behind me stretched empty, my RV a dark shape shrinking in the distance. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling I was being paced, not followed. Paced. Like something in the trees to either side kept perfect stride with me, silent, unseen. The hairs on my arms lifted, my body recognizing what my eyes could not. I wanted to break into a sprint, but I knew, if I ran, whatever stalked me would too. So I forced my legs steady, my steps measured, my breath shallow. When I reached the first outbuildings of the oil camp, I nearly wept with relief. Towers of rusting steel, trailers squatting on stilts, generators humming, yellow floodlights buzzed overhead, washing everything in harsh glow. I stumbled into the lot, shouting for help, but my voice cracked thin against the machinery. No one answered. The trailers stood silent, doors chained, windows boarded. The machines hummed, but no one tended them. The floodlights flickered, one after another, until only a dim glow remained. That was when I heard it. Tapping. Not from one direction, from everywhere. The walls of the trailers, the pipes overhead, the rusted barrels by the lot, hundreds of knuckles striking metal in rhythm, building, swelling into a chorus. I clamped my hands over my ears, stumbling between the buildings, shouting for someone, anyone. But the taps only grew louder, echoing off the steel, surrounding me, swallowing every sound. And then the voices returned. Inside. The word echoed from every corner, overlapping, weaving until it was a chant. My legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees on the frozen gravel, staring up at the floodlight above. It buzzed once, twice, then went out. Darkness fell. In the black, the voices pressed so close I could feel their breath on my skin. Fingers brushed my neck, cold and dry, though nothing visible touched me. I screamed until my throat tore raw, swinging the knife blindly, cutting nothing but air. Then headlights split the night. A truck barreled down the road, tires crunching hard on gravel, engine roaring. I stumbled toward it, waving my arms, sobbing. The driver slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop just feet away. A man leaned out the window, his face framed by a heavy beard and hood. "Jesus, buddy, you all right?" I could barely form words. "Help, please." He swung the door open, grabbed my arm, and hauled me into the cab. The heater blasted, the dashboard lights glowed warm. For the first time in weeks, I felt the presence ease, the whispers thinning like smoke in the wind. "You look like hell," the man said, glancing at me with wary eyes. "Name's Cole? You out here alone?" I nodded, shivering. "RV? Back there. It's not safe." Cole didn't press. He just put the truck in gear and gunned it south, headlights carving tunnels into the frozen night. I slumped against the seat, every muscle shaking, tears burning my face. Relief washed over me so sharp it hurt. But when I caught my reflection in the side mirror, my stomach dropped cold. It was smiling. Not my mouth, not my expression, just a grin stretched too wide, flashing in the glass, though my face was slack with exhaustion. I jerked back, staring at Cole. His knuckles tightened on the wheel. "You see it too, don't you?" he muttered. His voice was grim, certain. "What?" I whispered, my throat raw. "Them. They don't let you go once they've found you." The truck roared south, deeper into the dark, the tundra swallowing the road behind us, and I realized I hadn't escaped. I had only carried them farther. Cole drove without speaking for miles. The only sound was the low growl of the truck engine and the faint rattle of loose gear in the back. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, fighting the urge to keep glancing at the side mirror, terrified that the grinning reflection would still be there. When I finally dared to look, my face seemed normal again. Hollow, exhausted, pale, but mine. Yet that didn't calm me. If anything, it was worse, because it meant whatever was inside me could choose when to show itself. Cole lit a cigarette, cracked the window, and blew smoke into the icy air. His hands trembled just enough for me to notice. "You're not the first," he said finally, his eyes fixed on the endless stretch of highway. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "There's places up here," he said. "RV parks, camps, back roads. They look normal. Folks stop, stay a night, then something gets in. Starts with noises, then faces, then it lives in you." I stared at him, my pulse spiking. "How do you know that?" Cole's jaw tightened. He flicked the cigarette out the window and crushed the stub against the door. "Because I lost my brother to it, 5 years back. He was a guide, tough as they come. We camped outside Talk, same as you. He heard the tapping first. By the time we made it to Fairbanks, he was talking to voices that weren't there. By Anchorage, he wasn't my brother anymore." The truck's headlights carved tunnels through the frozen dark. I felt the road tilt beneath us, the weight of every mile pressing on my chest. "What happened to him?" I asked quietly. Cole didn't answer right away. His face was stone, eyes fixed forward. "I buried him in the Kenai, but sometimes late at night I still hear him tapping on my door." The words hung heavy between us. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just my nightmare. Others had carried it too. We stopped at a fuel station outside Wiseman, the kind of place that looks like it should have closed 20 years ago but clings to life in the emptiest corners of the world. A single light buzzed over the pumps, throwing weak circles into the snow. Cole got out, muttering he'd fill up, leaving me alone in the cab. That was when I saw it. In the glass of the windshield, faint but clear, the reflection of someone sitting in the back seat. A woman. Hair long, eyes hollow, lips moving silently. I spun around. The seat was empty. But when I turned back, she was still there in the glass. Her lips shaped words I couldn't hear until finally one formed sharp and certain. "Inside." My chest locked. Sweat broke cold on my neck. I scrambled out of the cab, nearly knocking Cole over as he pumped diesel. He caught my arm. "Easy, man. Easy. There's someone," I stammered, pointing. But when he looked, the cab was empty, just as I knew it would be. Cole's grip tightened. His eyes narrowed. "They're in deeper than I thought." We didn't stay long. The attendant never showed, though the lights buzzed and the pump flowed. Cole shoved Cash under the dusty window and gunned us back onto the road. For hours, I sat shaking, afraid to blink. The voices didn't speak, the tapping didn't come, but the silence was worse. Waiting, breathing. Finally, sometime near dawn, Cole pulled off onto a narrow dirt track. It wound through spruce and alder, barely wide enough for the truck. I gripped the dash. "A place I know," Cole said. "Old cabin my family kept. If anything will hold them back, it's there." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe any place could keep them out. But as the trees closed around us, I felt it again. That pulse in the earth, like a giant heart beating beneath the permafrost. The track ended at a sagging log cabin, half swallowed by moss and snowdrifts. Smoke hadn't curled from its chimney in years. Cole killed the engine and we climbed out, our boots crunching on frost. The silence here was thick, oppressive, pressing against my skull until my own thoughts echoed too loud. Inside, the cabin was bare. A table, 2 chairs, a wood stove rusted through. Dust coated everything. Cole lit a lantern, shadows lurching across the log walls. "This is where my brother stayed," he said, his voice low. "Last place he was himself." I sank into one of the chairs, the wood creaking under my weight. My body begged for rest, but my mind wouldn't let go. I kept glancing at the corners of the cabin, waiting for faces to bloom in the shadows. Cole crouched by the stove, striking flint until sparks caught. "You make it till morning," he muttered. "You got a chance. But you can't talk to them. Don't answer. Don't open. Not for anything." I nodded numbly, clutching the knife in my lap, but deep inside I already knew. Morning didn't matter, because they weren't outside anymore. They were in me. That night, as the fire crackled weakly and Cole dozed in his chair, I sat staring into the lantern flame, and in the glow I saw them, faces, dozens layered in the flicker. My father, my mother, Mark, even myself. Their mouths moved in unison, forming one word: home. The sound wasn't outside, it was in my chest, vibrating through my ribs. For the first time, I realized maybe I hadn't been running from them at all. Maybe I had been running to them. And the most terrifying thought of all wasn't that they wanted inside. It was that part of me wanted to let them. The fire in the stove burned low, throwing soft cracks that echoed like bones breaking in the silence. Cole had drifted into a shallow sleep, head slumped forward, beard glinting in the lantern light. I envied him, how he could close his eyes at all, how he could trust the darkness enough to let go. For me, sleep felt like surrender, and if I surrendered, I didn't think I'd wake again. The voices hadn't returned in full. Not yet. But I felt them, coiled in the quiet like wolves circling a camp, patient, waiting for weakness. My hands ached from clenching the knife, and still I couldn't put it down. I thought about Mark, the young man at Glen Allen who'd warned me not to answer them. The beer, the firelight, the way he'd looked at me like he'd already given up. No one else had seen him. Maybe he never existed. Or maybe he had once until they took him. Was that where I was headed? A shadow by the fire? A warning that disappears when the sun rises? I tried to remind myself of who I was. Daniel Morgan, 42. Raised in Montana, father gone young, mother buried 6 years back. My life built on roads and stories, chasing the freedom of the RV trail. But the more I repeated it, the thinner it felt, like a recording skipping over itself. Each time I said my name, it sounded less like mine. The lantern flickered, and in the glass I saw movement, not mine. A figure leaned behind me, pale face hovering just above my shoulder. Its mouth was near my ear, lips parting as though about to whisper. My body froze, ice filling every vein. I whipped around. Nothing there. Just Cole snoring lightly by the stove. But when I looked back at the lantern, the figure was still in the reflection, still leaning, still waiting. Its lips moved, slow and deliberate, shaping words I couldn't hear. I clamped my eyes shut, pressing my hands hard against my ears, but the words slid through anyway. "Danny, we're almost home." I snapped my eyes open, gasping, and the reflection was gone, but the echo of the words vibrated inside me, too close to deny. Cole stirred then, opening one bleary eye. "They're stronger tonight," he muttered. His voice carried the heaviness of a man who'd been through this before. "Why me?" I croaked. My throat was raw, my voice half broken. "Why not anyone else? Why keep following me?" Cole stared into the fire. "Because you heard them. That's all it takes. Some folks pass through untouched, some don't. Once you hear the first tap, you're marked. They don't stop." I wanted to scream at him, call it unfair, curse the wilderness, the silence, Alaska itself. But deep down I knew this land didn't care about fairness. It never had. Out here, survival wasn't promised. It was borrowed, and you paid for it eventually. The hours crawled. Every creak of the cabin felt like knuckles on the walls. Every gust of wind slid through the cracks as whispers. My body trembled from exhaustion, but terror kept me upright. Then the fire guttered low. The shadows thickened, swallowing corners, stretching long across the floor. And in that blackness, faces began to bloom. Pale, hollow, eyes like pits, mouths open in silent howls. They pressed against the walls, peered through the boarded windows, slid under the doorframe like mist. Cole shot upright, grabbing the shotgun from beside his chair. "Don't answer them," he barked, his eyes wild, the words trembling on his tongue. "No matter what you hear, don't answer." The cabin shook. Tapping erupted from every wall, every beam, every board. Faster, louder, until it became a drumbeat that rattled the lantern on the table. And then the voices came. My father, my mother, Mark, my own. All at once, calling my name. "Danny, open. Danny, inside. Danny." The sound was unbearable, drilling into my skull, vibrating in my teeth. I pressed my palms hard to my ears, screaming wordless into the chaos. Cole shouted something I couldn't hear, firing the shotgun. The blast lit the cabin bright for an instant, shadows scattering, but when the smoke cleared, the faces still pressed against the walls. Unbroken, unshaken. The floor buckled beneath us. The boards split, gaps opening to reveal darkness below, a void that breathed cold air into the cabin. From it rose hands, dozens, pale and thin, clawing toward us. Fingers scraped the floor, reaching, grasping, pulling. Cole grabbed my arm, yanking me back. "They want you, not me. Don't let them take you." His voice cracked with fear, desperation, but I couldn't move. My legs were rooted, my chest collapsing under the weight of the voices. And then one rose above the rest. It was mine. "Danny," it called. Not from outside, not from the floor, from my own mouth. I clamped both hands over my lips, choking on the sound, but it still came. My voice speaking without me, joining the chorus, begging myself to let them in. Cole's face twisted in horror. "God help you," he whispered. The lantern burst, plunging the cabin into black. And in that dark, I felt the hands find me. Cold, sure, pulling. The hands gripped my ankles, my wrists, my chest, pulling with strength that felt both real and impossible, like gravity itself had turned against me. I thrashed, knife slashing, but every cut met only air. Cold seeped up through my skin, deeper, threading into bone. The voices shrieked in triumph, not outside anymore, but inside my head, overlapping until I couldn't tell which thoughts were mine and which were theirs. Cole fired again, the shotgun blast deafening in the pitch black. Splinters rained from the logs, the recoil echoing off the walls. "Fight them," he screamed. "They only take you if you let go." But that was the problem. I was already letting go. My grip on myself was slipping, my memories tearing like old paper. My father's smile, my mother's hands on mine. Montana summers, the open highway. They unraveled, replaced by the faces pressing in the dark, all whispering home. I collapsed, hands dragging me toward the gap in the floor. Cold rushed up, swallowing me inch by inch. My knife clattered away, useless. My body sagged, too heavy to fight. For a moment, I almost welcomed it. The terror, the loneliness, the exhaustion. It could all end if I just stopped resisting. But then I heard another sound, not the whispers, not the tapping, something softer. The crackle of fire, the hiss of lantern flame. In my mind, it was my father again, his real voice this time, not the one twisted by them. The memory of him teaching me to camp, showing me how to strike flint, how to make light out of darkness. "Don't ever forget, Danny, the fire's yours. It keeps the night out. As long as you keep it burning, you're still here." The words weren't loud, but they were mine. I clenched my fists, sucked in a breath so sharp it burned, and screamed, not for them, but for me, for who I was, for Daniel Morgan, who still belonged to himself. The hands for a second, just for enough. Cole roared, dragging me back by the shoulders, his grip iron. Don't give them an inch, he shouted. He shoved me toward the stove, sparks still glowing in its belly. Feed it! Feed the fire! With trembling hands, I grabbed the nearest scrap of wood and jammed it into the coals. Flame leapt, snapping bright, searing through the shadows. The faces recoiled, shrieking, melting back into the walls. The hands slid from my skin, vanishing into the gaps in the floor. The voices wailed, furious now, battering the cabin with rage. But the fire grew stronger, light pushing into every corner, breaking their grip. My chest heaved, my heart stuttered, but I clung to the heat, the smell of smoke, the realness of it. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The tapping ceased, the whispers fell silent, the floor stilled beneath me. Only the fire remained, crackling steady, warm. Cole collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, shotgun limp across his knees. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw relief there. But not victory, just survival. We didn't speak for a long time. The fire burned, the cabin held. Dawn crept pale through the cracks in the boards. When the sun finally rose, the silence outside was only silence. No whispers, no tapping, no unseen weight pressing in. The air smelled of frost and wood smoke. But I knew better than to think it was over. They hadn't left. They never left. They had just retreated, waiting. Cole put a hand on my shoulder. You made it through a night. Most don't. That's something. I nodded, but inside I knew the truth. They were in me still. I could feel them, coiled in the spaces between my heartbeat, in the pauses between breaths. Alaska hadn't released me. It had claimed me, marked me, the way it does anyone who listens long enough to the silence. We left the cabin that morning. I never looked back, afraid of what I might see in the empty windows. Cole drove me south, back toward Fairbanks, back toward the thin thread of civilization. I watched the spruce and tundra blur past, and with every mile, the same thought gnawed at me. It wasn't about Alaska. It wasn't about the parks or the tapping or the voices. It was about the space inside myself that answered them. And that's the part I can't escape. Even now, back on the road with the RV humming beneath me and the sun shining across wide Montana skies, I still hear it sometimes. 3 taps. Soft, patient, waiting. And I know when the fire goes out, when the night finally presses too close, they'll be there again, calling my name, asking me to come home. I remember the first night clearer than any other. The air was still when I pulled into the campground, the kind of stillness that doesn't feel natural, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. My name's Daniel. I'm 41, and I had been living on the road for almost 2 years by then, trading a house mortgage for the endless highways of America with my RV as my shelter. I had seen a lot in that time, from the most breathtaking deserts of Arizona to the wild, broken coastlines of Maine. But I'd never been so unsettled pulling into a place as I was that evening. It was somewhere in Idaho, along a road that narrowed until it seemed the forest itself was swallowing it. The map had shown a small, primitive campground by the river, a spot that locals whispered about but never seemed to visit. The listing on my RV forum had no reviews, just a single note. Good signal, quiet nights. That was all I needed, or at least that's what I thought. The sun had already sunk low when I parked, casting the pines into long, spear-like shadows. The campground was almost empty, just 2 other rigs, one older Class C parked near the water, and what looked like a small travel trailer tucked back in the trees. I chose a spot at the far end beneath a ridge that loomed like a dark shoulder against the fading sky. My phone buzzed with bars, full service, surprisingly strong for how deep into the wilderness I was. I smiled. Signal meant safety. Signal meant connection. I should have noticed the quiet right then. Not just the absence of people, but the absence of life. No crickets, no bird calls. Even the river seemed to hush itself. I busied my hands with the familiar setup, leveling the rig, running the lines, stepping into the ritual that gave me comfort, but underneath the motions, I could feel it, a weight pressing against my ribs. By the time I lit a small fire and sat down with my camp chair, darkness had swallowed everything. The ridge behind me seemed taller at night, its black outline jagged and sharp against a bruised sky. I caught movement from the corner of my eye. The man from the Class C walking slowly toward the water. He didn't have a lantern, just moved like he knew the ground by memory. I wanted to call out a greeting, but something in the way he drifted along stopped me. His arms hung stiff at his sides, and his head was tilted slightly, as if he were listening to something none of us could hear. I stayed quiet, watching until he vanished into the river's edge. That night was the first time I heard it. I was half asleep in the bunk when the static came alive through my CB radio. It had been switched off since the last trip, but somehow it crackled awake, loud enough to jolt me upright. I leaned over, fumbling with the knobs, but the light on the unit wasn't even on. The sound was thin, hissing, broken by sharp bursts like whispers pressed against glass. "Help!" It was faint, buried in the distortion. A voice. "Please, hear me." The words scattered in fragments, swallowed by static. My skin tightened. I shut the unit off completely, checked the wires. Dead. No power, but the voice lingered, as if I could still feel it humming inside my skull. I barely slept after that. Every shift of the trees outside sounded like footsteps circling the RV. Every groan of the metal frame became a hand dragging across the siding. When dawn finally bled into the woods, I stumbled out, hollow-eyed, telling myself it was nothing more than fatigue. The man by the Class C wasn't there anymore. His rig sat quiet, curtains drawn, no sign of life. I walked toward the river out of curiosity, but the stones at the bank looked untouched, no prints in the mud, nothing to show he'd been there at all. I shook it off, returned to my own camp, and forced myself into routine: coffee, a short hike, reading by the fire. By mid-afternoon, the forest felt normal again. The sun pierced through the pines, and even the river found its voice, gurgling and churning against the rocks. Maybe I had just spooked myself. Maybe it was the road fatigue catching up. But that night, it returned. The static came louder, sharper, waking me with a jolt around 2 a.m. This time, I didn't reach for the CB. Instead, I lay there frozen, listening. The voice was clearer now, the words straining through the hiss. "Don't stay." The whisper knifed through me. My chest tightened as if I'd swallowed ice. "Leave before it." And then silence. I sat up, trembling, staring into the dark. A faint glow pulsed outside my window, near the ridge. It flickered, weak and unsteady, like a lantern moving slowly through the trees. I pressed my forehead against the glass, straining to see, but the light swayed, faltered, and then went out completely. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the side of the RV. I leapt back, heart slamming into my throat. The knock came again, this time lower, as if from the storage compartment. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then it traveled, knock, 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 around the RV's body, tracing the metal in deliberate rhythm. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to drive, to tear out of that place. But my legs wouldn't move. I sat paralyzed until the sound faded, until silence pressed itself back into the night. When morning came, I told myself I'd imagined it. But when I stepped outside, the dirt along the side of the RV bore marks, smudges, hand-shaped too high to belong to an animal. And still, the campground looked unchanged. The Class C stood silent, curtains tight. The Class C goes tight. The small trailer by the trees had no smoke, no movement, no sound. The people here didn't seem to exist beyond the shape of their rigs. That day I drove into town, more out of unease than need. At the small gas station, I mentioned the campground to the cashier, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes. "You stayed up there?" she asked, pausing mid-scan. "Yeah," I said. "By the ridge. Nice signal out there." Her expression hardened. "Signal's not a good thing up there." I frowned, waiting, but she didn't elaborate, just handed me my receipt and turned away. I drove back with the unease gnawing deeper. When the ridge came into view again, Towering black against the late afternoon sky, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, like the weight of a storm pressing down. That evening, as the sun died and shadows stretched long, I saw him again. The man from the Class C. But this time, he wasn't walking. He was standing, perfectly still, facing my RV from across the clearing. His posture was rigid, hands dangling. Even from that distance, I could tell his eyes were open wide, fixed on me. I raised a hand, forced a wave, but he didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there, a frozen figure against the backdrop of trees, until darkness swallowed him whole. I went inside, locked every latch, and told myself I'd leave first thing in the morning. But when midnight came, so did the static. The static came like a blade slicing through the dark. I sat upright before I even realized I was awake, my body moving on instinct, my ears tuned to that harsh, broken hiss pouring out from nowhere. The CB wasn't on. I checked it before bed, even pulled the power cord free, but still the sound filled the cabin of the RV like it was coming from the air itself. It built louder and louder until my teeth rattled with it. And then, cutting through, clear and sharp, came the voice. Daniel, my name, spoken as if by someone who had been standing just outside the thin wall of my RV, whispering into my bones. I scrambled to the small window above the dinette and pulled the curtain back. Outside, the ridge towered black against the sky, its outline jagged and cruel. For a moment, I thought I saw movement up there, small pinpricks of light flickering like eyes, but they vanished as quickly as they came. The static dropped back into silence, the kind of silence so complete it pressed into my eardrums until they rang. And then came the footsteps. Crunch. Slow. Deliberate. Moving around the RV. I killed the lantern, crouched down low, and tried not to breathe. Each step circled me, measured, patient, as if whoever or whatever it was knew exactly how long it could make me wait before I broke. I clutched the handle of the emergency hammer I kept by the bed, but my hands were trembling so violently I knew I'd be useless if anything burst through that door. The steps stopped, right at the back window. I waited. Seconds dragged into minutes. When I finally forced myself to look, I saw only a pale reflection of my own face in the glass, and then a shadow moved behind it. I dropped hard to the floor, covering my mouth to smother the cry clawing its way up my throat. The knock came again. Not 3 times this time, but once. Slow. Heavy. I didn't sleep at all. I sat there until the thin gray light of dawn leaked through the trees, until the birds finally broke their silence with tentative calls. By the time the sun crested the ridge, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. No hesitation. I packed fast, hands shaking as I yanked the lines, shoved gear into cabinets without caring if it shifted while driving. My only thought was to get out. I fired up the engine, grateful for the familiar rumble, and rolled forward. But when I reached the campground road, I stopped. The Class C was gone. Vanished. No tracks in the dirt, no sign of tires, no engine noise in the distance, just an empty patch of earth where it had been parked. The trailer tucked into the trees, gone too. The clearing looked as if no one had ever been there but me. I floored the gas and didn't look back. It wasn't until I hit the highway that I finally let out the breath I'd been holding since nightfall. The RV hummed under me, steady, solid. I told myself it was over, that I'd never go back, but the static followed. Not in the CB this time. In my phone. I pulled it from the dash mount when I heard the faint hiss like an old tape reel turning inside the speaker. The screen flickered, though I had full signal, strong bars. The voice came through faint, distorted, but I knew it was the same one. You can't outrun it. I hurled the phone onto the passenger seat, my throat dry, sweat slicking my palms against the wheel. The road stretched ahead, endless, pine and sky rolling past in a blur, but no matter how far I drove, the sound clung to me. It didn't stop until I reached a small town 2 hours away. The kind of town with one diner, one gas pump, and a motel that looked older than its sign. I parked the RV in a grocery lot and just sat there for a long while, trying to slow my breathing, trying to convince myself that sleep deprivation had pushed me into some strange hallucination. That night, I checked into the motel instead of sleeping in the rig. The bed was stiff, the air smelled of mildew, but I was too tired to care. I left the TV on for comfort, the white glow filling the room as I drifted. Around 3 in the morning, I woke. The TV screen had gone to static. Not the station ending kind of static, not snow, but the exact same hiss I'd heard in the woods. I reached for the remote with shaking hands, but before I could press a button, words laced through the distortion. "Daniel, you left us." The sound was so sharp, so intimate, it felt as if someone had leaned close to my ear. I threw the remote across the room. The screen went black instantly, plunging the room into dark silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat against the wall, knees pulled up, staring at the TV, waiting for it to come back on. When morning came, I went outside, desperate to breathe fresh air, to remind myself I was still in the world of the living. The parking lot was empty. The grocery store across the street was shut, blinds drawn. Even the gas pump was wrapped in caution tape. The town was wrong, too still, too quiet. I drove through its streets, expecting to see people out on porches, cars in driveways, kids on bikes. Instead, every window I passed was covered, every storefront locked. The town was empty. Empty, except for one thing. A payphone stood at the corner of Main and First. It began to ring as I approached, a hollow, metallic chime that echoed down the silent street. I stopped the RV dead in the middle of the road, engine idling, my hands slick against the wheel. The phone kept ringing, over and over, calling for me. Finally, I climbed out, legs numb, and walked to it. The closer I got, the louder the ringing became until it felt like the whole street was vibrating with it. My hand shook as I lifted the receiver. The static rushed in, violent, deafening. And then, "You shouldn't have left." I dropped the phone, stumbling back. It swung against its cord, clattering against the booth, but the voice kept spilling out, words drowning in static until I couldn't breathe, until I turned and ran. I didn't go back for the RV until the sun was high, and even then I approached it like a stranger might approach a coffin. The thought came unbidden, chilling me to the marrow. What if I hadn't left the ridge soon enough? What if I had already brought it with me? I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands gripping the wheel until the bones showed white through my skin. The payphone's ringing had stopped, but the echo of it was still inside me, a phantom sound pressing against my eardrums. Every instinct I had screamed to drive, to put the town, the ridge, the static, all of it behind me, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the air had thickened, pressing me down, holding me in place. When I finally forced myself to turn the key, the engine roared to life, but even its familiar rumble carried something new, a faint hiss buried beneath the pistons. I told myself it was nothing more than the road, nothing but my nerves chewing at me. But the longer I listened, the more it grew. I pulled out of the town, heading east, chasing the thin ribbon of asphalt that led toward larger roads. For a while, it worked. The forest thinned, sunlight struck the windshield, and I started to believe maybe I could leave it behind. Then I passed the Class C. It was parked on the side of the road, tilted slightly into the ditch, curtains still drawn tight. I slowed, unable to stop myself, staring as I rolled by. The door was open, hanging crooked on its hinges. The inside was black as a cave, no movement, no sound. But on the side panel, scrawled in something dark and uneven, were 3 words, "We still here." I pressed the gas so hard the RV shuddered, the wheels squealing against the asphalt. For the next hour, I drove like a man possessed, eyes darting to every mirror, every patch of trees, waiting for another glimpse of that rig. But it never came. The Class C vanished into the distance, leaving me alone with the weight of those words. I stopped only when exhaustion forced me off the highway, pulling into a truck stop just outside Helena. I killed the engine and sat there, chest heaving, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. No static, no whispers, just the hum of diesel engines and the clatter of air brakes around me. For the first time in days, I felt a hint of safety. The presence of others, real people, anchored me back into the world. I bought coffee, filled the tank, even exchanged a few words with a trucker about the road conditions up north. His voice was steady, his eyes clear. No hidden meanings, no static. That night, I parked at the far end of the lot, trying to convince myself that with so much company around me, nothing could happen. I even managed to drift off for a while, wrapped in the faint comfort of engine noise around me. Then came the dream. I was back at the ridge, the trees clawing at the sky, the river silent as glass. My RV sat where I had parked it, but it wasn't mine anymore. The windows were black, the metal warped, the door gaping open like a mouth. Inside, the static pulsed, a living thing, thick and wet and alive. And in the center of it stood the man from the Class C. His head tilted, his eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent scream. He lifted his hand, reaching for me. "Daniel," he mouthed. I woke choking on my own breath, the inside of the RV sweltering though the night air outside was cool. My phone lay on the counter, screen lit, though I hadn't touched it. The call screen was open. The name at the top read, "Unknown Signal." And the timer was still running. 43 minutes. I hurled the phone against the wall. The screen cracked, the call ended, but the sound didn't stop. The static poured out of the tiny speaker, filling the RV, vibrating through my chest until my vision blurred. I stumbled outside, bare feet slapping against the hot pavement. The lot was silent now. The trucks were gone. Every last one. The entire place was empty, deserted, like it had never been occupied. The payphone at the edge of the lot began to ring. I ran back into the RV, slammed the door, and fired the engine. I didn't care where I went anymore. I just needed to move. I drove blind, highway signs flashing past unread, the road unspooling endlessly beneath my wheels. But no matter how far I went, the static clung to me. Sometimes faint, like a whisper in another room. Sometimes sharp, like knives through my ears. Always there. By the time the sun rose, I was on some back road I didn't recognize, the map spinning uselessly on my cracked phone screen. I pulled into a clearing just to breathe, just to convince myself I still existed outside of the noise. That's when I saw the marks. Handprints. Dozens of them smeared across the sides of the RV, pressed into the dust and grime, overlapping, layered, some small, like children's, some too large to belong to any human hand. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. The forest around me seemed to lean closer, its branches clawing down like fingers. The ridge was nowhere in sight, but I felt it anyway, pressing against the back of my skull. The static flared, louder than ever. And through it, voices now, more than one, tangled and desperate. "Don't leave us. Stay. Listen." I clamped my hands over my ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside me, under my skin, vibrating through my bones. My knees buckled, and I hit the dirt, staring up at the trees swaying overhead. That's when the smell came. Not the scent of pine or earth, but rot. Wet, sweet, suffocating, like meat left in the sun too long. It filled my nose, thickened my lungs, coated my tongue until I gagged. I scrambled back into the RV, slammed every lock, and sat there shaking. My reflection in the glass showed a man hollowed out, eyes ringed dark, skin pale as bone. And then my CB lit up. The light glowed, though I hadn't touched it, though the wires still hung disconnected. The speaker hummed, sharp and bright. And through the static, one voice cut clear, calm, and low. "Daniel, you never should have answered." The line went dead. The words echoed in my head long after the speaker went silent. You never should have answered. I sat frozen in the dinette, staring at the dead CB, waiting for it to flicker back to life. My breath came in shallow pulls, chest tight as if the air itself had turned against me. The RV was still, but I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. I told myself to leave, start the engine, find the nearest town, keep moving, but my legs wouldn't obey. Something in those words pinned me down, like a hook sunk deep beneath the skin. That's when the glass began to fog. At first, I thought it was my own breath, but then I saw it, shapes forming on the inside of the windows, handprints slowly pressing into the condensation, spreading one after another. Too many. Dozens. I staggered back, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The RV rocked once, as if something had leaned against it from the outside. Then again, harder, the walls groaning under the strain. I grabbed the keys and turned the ignition. The engine coughed to life, loud, shaking, but it didn't drown out the other sound, the chorus rising from the static. Voices, layered, overlapping, impossible to separate, some begging, some angry, some weeping, all of them calling my name. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. I threw the RV into drive and floored it. Gravel sprayed behind me as I tore out of the clearing, branches clawing at the sides, the sound of them like fingernails on metal. My whole body shook, every nerve screaming to get away. But no matter how fast I went, the voices clung to me. The road bent sharply and the headlights cut across something that made my stomach drop, the Class C. It was ahead of me again, parked sideways across the road, blocking my way. Its headlights were off, windows black, the gaping door facing me like an open wound. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded, tires screaming, and I barely stopped in time. For a long moment I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at that dark shape, and then the inside lit up. Not with lamps, not with fire, with static. The glow of it poured from every window, white and broken, like a television tuned to nothing at all. The man appeared in the doorway, his body stiff, his head tilted, his mouth working soundlessly. Then he raised his hand and pointed at me. The CB crackled. "You left us." The lights inside my RV flickered and died. Dark swallowed me whole. I don't know how I managed it, but I slammed the gear into reverse, cranked the wheel, and backed down the road until I found a narrow cut through the trees. Branches scraped, snapping against the sides, but I forced the rig through, my only thought survival. The forest swallowed me. No road, no path, just trees and dirt and blackness. The RV bounced hard, every cupboard crashing open, but still I pressed forward until the wheels spun out in mud. I killed the engine and sat there, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. The silence was suffocating. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe I'd lost it, that the voices couldn't follow me here. Then I heard the knock. Not on the RV this time, on the inside. 3 sharp raps against the wall beside my head. I froze. My skin crawled, every hair rising. Slowly I turned. Nothing. Just the thin paneling, the dinette seat. The knock came again, this time from the cabinet above me. Something was inside. I bolted for the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the night. The forest loomed tall and endless, the ridge somewhere behind it, though I couldn't see it in the dark. My breath poured out white, though the air was warm. That's when the static returned, filling the trees, echoing off the trunks, as if the whole forest had become a speaker. The sound pulsed, rising and falling, alive, and through it came the voices. Closer now, clearer. "Don't leave. Don't leave us here." I stumbled back, clutching my head, my ears ringing so hard I could barely think. The rot smell rolled over me again, stronger this time, like a tide of decay spilling out from between the trees. Then I saw them, figures between the trunks, dozens, maybe more. Standing in the dark, pale faces turned toward me, unmoving, waiting. Their mouths opened in unison, and the static screamed. I dropped to my knees, my whole body convulsing under the weight of the sound. My vision blurred, spots of white tearing across the world. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, silence. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. No figures, no sound. Just me on my knees in the dirt, the RV looming behind me like a tomb. For a long time, I didn't move. Then, slowly, I pushed myself up and staggered back inside. The CB was dark again, the windows clear, the handprints gone. But in the center of the table lay something that hadn't been there before. My phone. Screen lit, timer running. Call time, 11:59:59. And it was still climbing. The call timer kept climbing. 12 hours. 13, 14. It didn't matter that the phone's battery should have been long dead. It glowed steady, the thin blue light painting my hands as I held it. I wanted to throw it out the window, to smash it under my boot, but some part of me couldn't. The way you can't stop staring at a wound, even when it makes you sick. The longer I watched the numbers climb, the more I realized what it meant. I hadn't left the call. Not since the first night. I was still connected. I shoved the phone into a drawer, slammed it shut, and fired up the RV. The forest clung to me as I crawled through the narrow cut of trees, branches raking against the roof like claws. Eventually, the road found me again, an old strip of pavement cracked and half swallowed by moss. I followed it blindly, desperate to reach anywhere with light, with people, with noise that wasn't the static humming under my skin. For a while, it seemed to work. The woods thinned, the horizon open, and a sliver of sky blushed pale with dawn. I pressed the gas harder, tasting freedom. That's when the radio came alive. Not the CB, the dash radio. It flared so loud the speakers rattled, blasting static sharp enough to make me flinch. My hand shot out to kill it, but the knob wouldn't turn. The buttons clicked uselessly under my fingers. The volume only grew louder, sharper, until I thought my eardrums would tear. And then, beneath it, the voices. Not whispers this time, screams. Don't leave us. The words hit like a physical force, rattling the windows, shaking the wheel in my hands. I swerved, tires screaming, nearly losing the road. The windshield spiderwebbed with cracks as if invisible fists had struck it from the outside. I slammed both fists into the dash, and just like that, silence. The radio went dead. The windshield was whole again. I pulled over, chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face. My reflection in the glass looked alien, wild eyes, lips moving without sound, like I'd been mouthing along with them. I gripped the wheel, forcing my breath to slow. I had to keep moving. Had to reach town, people, somewhere real. Hours passed. The road carried me deeper east, though every mile felt heavier, as if the RV itself resisted. By late afternoon, I rolled into another small town, this one bigger than the ghost I'd left, with cars, open shops, people moving about. For the first time in days, I felt hope pierce through the fear. I parked near a diner, forcing my shaking legs to carry me inside. The bell above the door chimed, the smell of coffee and grease wrapping around me like a lifeline. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, gave me a smile. "Seat yourself, hon." Her voice was steady, real. I slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and tried not to look like a man coming apart. My hands still trembled as I lifted the mug, but the warmth grounded me. The hum of conversation around me felt like salvation. For a few minutes, I believed maybe I'd outrun it. Then I noticed the payphone in the corner. It was ringing. No one else seemed to hear. The trucker at the counter sipped his soup. The waitress scribbled down an order. The couple in the booth behind me laughed softly. But the phone kept ringing. My stomach dropped. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the bitter heat of the coffee. But the sound drilled into me, louder with each chime, until it was all I could hear. Finally, shaking, I stood. I don't know why I picked it up. Habit. Instinct. Maybe compulsion. The static roared through the receiver. "Daniel." The voice was low, guttural, as if spoken through water. "You're one of us now." The diner was gone. I stood in the booth, phone pressed to my ear, but the chatter, the clinking dishes, the smell of coffee vanished. The room around me was dark, walls warped and dripping. The other booths were filled, not with people, but with pale shapes hunched and twitching, their mouths open, their throats pouring static instead of words. I dropped the receiver. It swung on its cord, clattering, but the sound didn't stop. The shapes turned their heads toward me, eyes glowing faint, milky white. I ran. I shoved through the door, back into blinding daylight, nearly collapsing on the sidewalk. The street was normal again. Cars, people, life. But the payphone still rang behind me, louder than ever. I bolted for the RV, heart hammering, lungs tearing. I didn't care where I drove, I just needed to move. The second the engine roared to life, the call timer on the phone, still hidden in the drawer, jumped to 23:59:59 and froze. No longer climbing. Waiting. I pressed the pedal hard, tearing out of that town, out of the sunlight, back into the endless road. The voices didn't follow this time. Not yet, but the silence they left was worse. It felt like the pause before the storm. I remember thinking as the miles slid under me and the world blurred into a strip of asphalt and shadow, that the only thing left to do was make the signal stop. Not just the sound that I could endure, but the tether it had wrapped around me. The invisible chain that kept dragging me back toward the ridge, toward whatever had started whispering my name. I had to cut it, whatever the cost. I scavenged through town in a kind of blind determination. The hardware store smelled of oil and sawdust. The clerk's eyes tracked me with a curiosity I didn't have the energy to return. I bought a hammer. No, 2 wire cutters, a roll of duct tape, a small propane torch, a heavy-duty battery clamp. I paid with a wad of crumpled bills and left before the cashier could ask questions. Outside, sunlight washed everything ordinary in forgiving color, but the light couldn't wash away the buzz low in my bones. Back in the RV, I laid everything out on the dinette as though preparing for surgery. The static was a low thrum at the edges of perception, the way tinnitus hangs inside your skull and settles in like a second heartbeat. The phone in the drawer glowed innocuous and terrible. 235959. It had been frozen there like a waiting thing. I thumbed the drawer open, and the light spilled over my knuckles in a thin, cold wash. I tried to smash it with the hammer first. The head descended, bright steel against glass, and the receiver arced, shattered, sparks spitting like angry fireflies. The timer didn't blink. The speaker still hissed. I realized, with a humor so dark it tasted like bile, that destroying the object didn't destroy the thing. It only made the thing angrier. So I did the only other thing I could think of. I drove. I aimed the rig toward the highest point I could find, toward the radio tower marked on the county map as a dot of danger and power. If the call was bound to a tower or some old repeater up on the ridge, maybe getting close, messing with the equipment, slamming the source would sever the line. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was sacrificial. It didn't matter. I needed motion, purpose, action, anything to not sit and listen while the world peeled off its edges. The road to the tower climbed like a spine. Pines closed in until the sky became a thin ribbon. Wind clawed at the RV as I strained upward, heart trying to leap from my chest. The static climbed with me, omnipresent and now threaded with a new strain, urgency. The voices had learned to push, to shove, to sound like 1,000 people stomping at a door. When I pulled into the little fenced lot beside the compound, the place looked abandoned. Satellite dishes stared blankly at the sky, and rusted generators yawed like sleeping animals. A steel ladder climbed the tower's base into the black. I killed the engine and sat there for a long minute, thinking of everything I had missed. Friends, real laughter, a life not scored in static. I thought of the man from the Class C, the hollow eyes, the way he'd mouthed my name like a benediction. I thought of the payphones and the towns that blinked out into silence. I thought of the voice that had told me I shouldn't have answered, and then I climbed. The aluminum ladder bit through my palms, cold and unforgiving. My breath fogged, though it wasn't cold. Adrenaline made its own winter inside me. Halfway up, the world opened, a bowl of trees and distant roads painted in motion. Above that, the tower loomed like a bone, crossbars and sky and useless, humming metal. The higher I went, the louder the static became, until it roared like surf in my ears. At the top, the wind was a living thing. I strapped myself to the rail the way I had strapped an old boatman to a mast, because you didn't climb a tower without respect for gravity. I had the battery clamps, the wire cutters, the torch. My hands moved on their own, fingers steady despite the blood singing in them. I found the junction box, a hive of cables, some thick as a wrist, others finer than a finger. Everything was labeled in a language of numbers and letters I didn't fully understand. Everything looked capable of broadcasting 1,000 voices. The voice came then, not through the static, but as if spoken from the metal itself. Low, amused, intimate. You came back. I thought of running, of dropping into the trees and never surfacing. I thought of driving until my tires blew and the rig fell apart. But the tether had no interest in my avoidance. It fed on proximity, on surrender. If I wanted to stop it, I had to be the brake. I clamped the battery clips to a thick main line, and with the torch sparking a furious heat, I severed the cable. Sparks flared like instant fireworks. The tower's hum dropped a fraction, then the static ratcheted higher like a creature in pain. Wires shrieked and popped. I pulled, yanked, ripped insulation, severed connectors until my arms trembled from effort and wind. And then I pulled the clamp from the battery. Everything went white and then utterly black. Silence poured into me. It crashed into my ears and left them ringing with the absence. For a moment, breathless, dizzy, weightless, I tasted victory. But victory is a crooked thing. The silence held only for a heartbeat. Then, from somewhere below, a chorus rose. Voices no longer dictating through metal but through memory and marrow, through the places inside me the tower had never touched. "You think cutting the wire will free you?" The man said, as if he had leaned over my shoulder to whisper. It wasn't human speech anymore. It was a tapestry. The river, the ridge, the payphones, the hollow towns, woven into syllables and thrust at me like a blade. I almost fell. The ladder felt like a thin twig under my weight. Down below, the Class C's headlights flicked on in a field I hadn't seen before, like lanterns set upon the graves of things. The RV was a speck. The world had folded and then unfolded again with a cruelty I couldn't name. I wanted to scream, but my throat had no interest in sound. Instead, I whispered, because whispering felt like bargaining. "What do you want?" I asked, and the wind answered with the memory of his face. Not revenge, not malice in the human sense, not even curiosity. The thing wanted to be heard. The signal wanted an audience. "You answered," it said flatly. "You listened. You carried home the sound after you thought leaving would change the channel." The words were not unkind. They were awful in their calm. I didn't know how to be okay with that. I didn't know how to become small enough to vanish. The only other answer I had was what I'd done. Interference. Resistance. Destruction of the channel. If it had to come at cost, let it be mine. I climbed down, each rung a negotiation with terror. By the time my boots hit the gravel, my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold the tools steady. The static slithered back into the world, a residuum of what had been summoned. The tower lay mute now, dead, silent wires limp like a beheaded thing. I felt an odd pang of pity for it, as if I had killed something that didn't deserve to die. Back at the RV, the world seemed to hold its breath. The phone in the drawer had gone dark. The timer was gone. The drawer was empty. For the first time in weeks, there was no hiss in the air. I sat on the bumper and wept. Not loud, not theatrical, but a shaking, exhausted thing that spilled out the fear and the guilt and the relief and the absurd, impossible gratitude that I had acted. The man from the Class C was nowhere to be seen. The ridge might as well have been a hill in the distance. The payphones in small towns would ring no more for me. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of a long, terrible lesson. I had learned something no manual could teach, that silence can be a kind of freedom, but silence taken by force leaves a cavity, a hole where voices used to be, an absence that remembers. When the sun finally slid down behind the trees and the RV hummed quietly, just the engine's heat bleeding off, I climbed into the driver's seat, started the rig, and drove slow, not away so much as forward. I had things to repair, things to reckon with, a life to stitch back together, people to call, real, living ones, if they'd have me. I stopped at the next town, and this time when the payphone rang, I walked by without reaching for it. I sat in a diner and let the clatter and small talk wash over me like a salve. In the weeks after, the static never returned in quite the same way. Once, late at night, I heard a faint hiss from an old radio, an echo, a memory, and for a second, my fingers twitched toward a hammer. But I let it be. I let the world keep its small imperfections. What the experience taught me, finally, was not just terror, but responsibility. We answer calls every day, some harmless, some hollow, some that tug at the parts of us that want to be needed. You can ignore a ring once, twice, but sometimes answering makes you the keeper of something you didn't know how to carry. Sometimes the kindest thing isn't to offer an audience. Sometimes it's to walk away, to refuse the pull and to leave the dead things where they lie. I tell this not because I'm proud of how bravely I acted. I tell it because I want you to know that fear has a grammar, and so does response. If the world knocks on your metal and whispers your name, If the signal comes through clear and hungry, remember, answers can bind you. Silence can free you. And in the quiet afterward, when your hands are steady enough to hold a coffee cup without shaking, there is room to choose how you will live. I drove on. The road went east. The ridge folded into memory. The radio stayed off for a long time.